Planet Earth's the rarest flower in the desert of deep space, and a rule of nature.
Here.
Councilmember Mayo.
Here.
Councilmember Qureshi. Councilmember Siemens. Councilmember Qureshi.
Here.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I was just informed that we are getting the correct agenda for the handouts over here, so just wait a little bit and we'll have the correct ones for you this evening. There are no changes to our agenda tonight. And looking at the next couple of weeks, there are only 5 meetings left until the city elections. Next week on October 4th, we'll be meeting here for our regular meeting. The council will meet before our public meeting at 6 p.m. in an administrative function session to discuss the city manager's evaluation, and then we'll come here at 7:30. Our voting session that evening will be the second reading ordinance authorizing execution of a payment in lieu of taxes agreement for Parkview Towers, that's 7667 Maple Avenue, and also the second reading ordinance for a pilot agreement for Cambridge Apartments at 676 Houston Avenue, and another second reading ordinance for a pilot at 666 Houston Avenue. We also have a single reading ordinance approving contract for purchases of office furniture and a resolution for providing for committee appointments. Our work sessions next week will be a discussion of permitting restaurants to serve alcohol on the public right-of-ways at sidewalk cafes, and a discussion of amending the Safe Grow Act to add neonicotinoids to the list of restricted cosmetic lawn care pesticides. That is next week's meeting. And then on Wednesday, October 11th, we're here at 7:30. Our work session will be an overview of the city financial policies and appropriate reserve levels, and a discussion of the concept plan for Tacoma Junction redevelopment, which we will have presented to us this evening. And then on Wednesday, October 18th, we have a voting session that will start with the first reading ordinance appointing judges for the 2017 city election, the first reading ordinance amending the Safe Grow Act, and our work sessions will be a discussion of the FY 2018 budget amendment number 2 and a presentation of the draft housing and economic development strategic plan. That'll take us then to Wednesday, October 25th. Our voting session that night will be the second reading ordinance appointing judges for the 2017 city election, the second reading ordinance amending the Safe Grow Act, first reading ordinance approving the FY 2018 budget amendment number 2, first reading ordinance amending city code, that's off, sorry. And then our work session that night is a discussion of legislative priorities for the upcoming session in Annapolis, and a discussion of proposed amendments to the city charter, section 702, regarding the council not interfering with appointments or removals. Then we have the final meeting of this city council will be on Wednesday, November 1st at 7:30. We will have a second reading ordinance approving the FY 2018 budget amendment number 2 on that evening, and most likely some other things on that night, I'm guessing. So that is what we will be working on over the next couple of weeks. Now we will have public comments on our voting items. The first voting item we have this evening is the second reading ordinance amending the City Code, Chapter 13.16 on special traffic regulations, or as we've been shorthanding this, bikes on sidewalks. So if you have any comments on that, please come to the podium. No comments on, okay.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. I already spoke about this a couple weeks ago, but just because we're addressing this again, I wanted to revisit the issue. As I spoke before, bike safety is incredibly important to me. As when I was 5 years old, I almost lost my mom. She was hit by a car while she was biking. But at the same time, I have a sister with an intellectual disability, and I'm a disability civil rights attorney. I work with people who are blind, who have physical disabilities, and they all have incredible challenges walking on sidewalks or using wheelchairs on sidewalks as is. I have seen firsthand people get hit by pedestrians and bikers. I've also seen with my sister, for example, walking into Tacoma Park sidewalks, her having trouble enough navigating the narrow sidewalks, bumps in the sidewalks, and the lack of audible and visible signals at crosswalks as well. And I'm very concerned about the fact that we are trying to add a new variable such as bikes to the equation when we have not nearly adequately addressed the concern for people with disabilities, elder populations, children. I've spoken with a lot of neighbors as well who've expressed concerns about having their kids just get to bus stops due to the lack of sidewalks, due to the lack of crosswalks with all these audible and visible signals. And I just really want to express my concern about this introduction. I understand that we're trying to promote bike safety and pedestrian safety, but we need to make sure that we're making sure that pedestrian walkways, crosswalks, and sidewalks are safe for pedestrians. But we also need to make sure that there are safe roadways for bikers. But I think there are different ways to accomplish that than introducing bikes to sidewalks and crosswalks, such as designated bike lanes, certain street closures during certain times, just to make sure that they're safe. And also, since the last time I spoke, I know, again, I said I'm not an expert in this issue, but I've been trying to do research suggesting that it's actually safer for bikes to be on sidewalks and crosswalks, and I have not seen anything. I have not seen any bike associations suggesting we should be doing this, and I don't know why we're trying to take this approach. I think I've actually seen stuff suggesting that it's more dangerous for bikes to be on sidewalks due to increased risk of hitting pedestrians or people with disabilities, and also the lack of visibility for vehiclists. I think when the bike is off the roadway, there's a serious concern about the fact that cars are not registering cyclists as vehicles on the street, and they're more likely to actually hit them. So I think without any of this information suggesting it's safer, plus all the concerns about bikers potentially hurting elder populations, people with disabilities, and children, we need to continue with this vote. Thank you.
Any other?
Mayor, council members, I'm Joe Edgell. I'm the former chair of the Safe Roadways Committee. It was the Safe Roadways Committee that recommended this, as you may recall. And I think this all or nothing discussion, which tends to occur, isn't exactly helpful. It's important to understand that our recommendation was an interim step. What the city needs to do is build adequate biking infrastructure, specifically along state highways, and the state and the city don't seem to have the budget or the desire to do that. As a result, there are certain areas that are unsafe to ride, such as Ethan Allen Avenue, such as University Boulevard, such as New Hampshire Avenue, all major state highways, even Carroll Avenue on the stretches that don't have bike lanes. So this is not an ideal solution, and we understand that. But I've been hit personally 3 times riding my bike, all of them on the road by cars. I've never been hit by a pedestrian, and I've never hit a pedestrian. And I, as most cyclists do, signal that we're coming by on the left, and we slow down. When I ride the sidewalk as I do along Ethan Allen Avenue illegally, because I've almost been hit on Ethan Allen Avenue, I make sure that I come up behind pedestrians slowly, and I make sure that I announce my presence. And what our recommendation on the Safe Roadways Committee was a long time ago was that we put in speed limits for cyclists to travel, and also that they're required to have audible warnings. Now, I know the council's chosen not to go forward with this. I think that's been pretty much decided based on the straw votes and the comments that we saw previously. But if you're going to go that direction, then I would ask that you look into the future at how do we actually improve the bicycling infrastructure. Because I can assure you, it's damn unsafe on the roads, the state highways in Tacoma Park. I always find it entertaining when people who don't ride regularly on the roads talk about how unsafe it is for bikes to be on sidewalks. I ride, I've ridden on sidewalks, I've ridden on the roads, and I'm, as a cyclist, willing to take certain risks, and I'm not going to make risks to other people, and the vast majority of cyclists are that way. So while you may have decided this issue, remember our recommendation was an interim solution, and that ultimately we need to do more to build biking infrastructure. And it would be great if I could hear a commitment out of each council member to do that very thing. Thank you.
Great. Any other comments on this voting item? Yeah. We'll get you a microphone, Mr. Lovelace. Go ahead. You can.
TJ Matthews. As a regular bike commuter, one of the things that I regularly witness in Tacoma Park is how many of my fellow bike commuters are disregarding the laws. And this upsets me to no end. I've yet to, as having witnessed hundreds of bike commuters in Tacoma Park running red lights, particularly during rush hour, I'd really like to see the city step up with some enforcement and start issuing tickets. Thanks.
Any other public all right, we'll give you the microphone right now, Mr. Lovelace. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Pat Lovelace. Can you hear me? Yeah.
1 second.
My name is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. Ward 4, Tacoma Park, Franklin Apartments. I want to ask you people out there to be very mindful that in a wheelchair, I think we need to use the sidewalks more often, because I know not only am I in a wheelchair, but I'm also blind, and I can't control my wheelchair. I have to have somebody with me because my hands are ruined, amputations on them. And I'd like to also ask you people out there to make sure that we have safe sidewalks to have our bicycles or whatever and wheelchairs on them, because remember, these wheels are my feet. This is my legs. So I should be considered a pedestrian because of the fact, but it's also a vehicle. I'd also like to ask you people out there, to ask the schools and the parents out there to teach the kids every time, a bicycle is not a toy. It's a vehicle for getting around and also getting exercise. But I think we should also teach these kids when they get their new bikes on Christmas or their birthdays, this is not a toy. It can be very dangerous, so obey all the rules of the road and watch out for other people who don't have a bike. I think then we'll be a lot better off, because a lot of kids, they do wheelies and stuff on them. I've seen it when I was able to see. And I think, that's not treating the bicycle with safety. And they should always say, like we said in carpentry, safety first. Just don't play with it like it's a toy. I learned not to do that with a power saw, and I'd like to see the kids learn that on their very first bicycle. Their very first ride should be teaching them that it's not a toy, and that we do need our bikes, and also that we're going to have wheelchairs on the sidewalks, I hope, because I'd hate to have to be out in the middle of the street and the guy who's pushing me doesn't catch a guy coming up in front of him, catching a guy swerving, because also we're going to consider a lot of people on the roads drive drunk or on drugs. We can't control them. So remember, we got to be our own mind. Thank you very much for letting me share.
Thank you, Mr. Lovelace. Any other comments on this voting item? Ms. Michui?
Mary Jane Michui, Ward 2. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. I like to say a little words from people who are deaf and also can't see that well. because deaf people can't hear. It's great, and thank you, Joe, for saying, and I imagine a lot of people do. Most bicyclists are safe, and they say, passing on the left, but deaf people can't hear that. And I'm concerned, it's particularly myself, not just deaf people, but people are hard of hearing. I'm seeing, sorry, seeing, like myself. I was born with poor visual depth perception, which, by the way, if you have daughters, this usually happens with females, get them tested for visual depth perception at the age of 6, please, because it has to be corrected then. Do this, and I can see well enough to drive under controlled conditions, but my worst injuries have been tripping over the sidewalks. The sidewalks are not made for people who are blind or even with poor depth perception.
True.
I've tripped, there's plenty of times. I mean, you can just walk 2 blocks usually anywhere in Tacoma Park and you see things that the shelves don't meet properly. I have 2 compound fractures I've had from this. And it's going to affect me the rest of my life. I have arthritis from it. And please, I've lived in this town for 32 years. I've never seen a blind person, never in those going down on the streets, because it's probably not safe. I mean, I would feel sorry for a blind person. It's funny, when they build these sidewalks in my area, they have these areas that's supposed to help blind people feel, because they have little circles on them and perforations on the ground. That wouldn't help somebody who's blind get to them. And like I said, I mean, I have, in addition to the poor visual depth perception, I also have dry eyes, and the combination makes me big risk of becoming totally blind before I get older. So I have a lot of empathy towards blind people because of that. So please keep us in consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments tonight on this voting item? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll move to the second voting item this evening. It's the first reading ordinance authorizing execution of a payment in lieu of taxes for Parkview Towers. That is 7667 Maple Avenue. This is an MPH owned property, Montgomery Housing Partnership. Any public comments on that?
Good evening, Council, Mayor Stewart. I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for the opportunity, for giving me the opportunity to present our request for a pilot for Parkview Towers. I enjoyed the conversation, the discussion, and the questions, and we appreciate your support of our mission to provide affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Anyone else have any comments on that voting item? No, we'll move to our third voting item. That is the first reading ordinance authorizing execution of a payment in lieu of taxes for Cambridge Apartments. That's at 676 Houston Avenue. Okay.
Good evening, Mayor Stewart and council members. My name is John Spencer. I'm the Senior Vice President of Victory Housing. We are the owner of Cambridge Apartments and also Winslow House Apartments on Houston Avenue. I'm joined here tonight with Timur Respekov, the Senior Asset Manager of Victory Housing, and together Timur and I are responsible for the asset management of Victory Housing's 30 properties and 2,200 apartments in the D.C. area. Most of our properties, you may know, are for senior housing, but we do have 4 family properties, 2 of which are Cambridge Apartments and Winslow House on Houston Avenue. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening to request a partial waiver of city taxes on those 2 properties. We are long-term owners of Cambridge and Winslow. We've owned them since 2000 and 2003 when we acquired them and substantially renovated both properties. And then in 2003, we bought a much larger property, which you're probably even more familiar with, Victory Tower, which we also substantially renovated and have been the owner since that time. These are both 60-year-old properties, and 60-year-old properties require more repairs and maintenances than newer properties. We take pride in maintaining the functionality, resident satisfaction, and curb appeal of our properties, and it costs a little bit more money to do that. And that's really the purpose of our request this evening. We also need to anticipate future capital improvements. We've already owned these properties 17 years. We are perpetual owners, so that we need to have a little more money in reserve should capital improvements be required or an emergency repair be needed. Just to give you an example of how we do keep up our properties, we've just completed a renovation and updating of our community room at Cambridge Apartments, and we're planning to have an open house in that room and that space to celebrate at the end of October, early November. We don't have a date just yet, but it will be a late afternoon open house for residents, and if some of you would love to join us, we'd love to have you there. Rather than go on, I think you're probably familiar with our request, and I would just, if you have questions for me now or later, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much. I hope you can stay around, and when we reach that item on our agenda, the council may have some questions for you. So thank you. Any other comments on this item, this voting item? All right. No? The next voting item was, gentleman just discussed that as well, was also a request for a pilot at 666 Houston Avenue. Any comments on that? All right, seeing no comments on our voting items, then we'll move on to general public comments. So, Mr. Lovelace, why don't you go first?
Okay. My name is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. I want to, and I live in Ward 4, Tacoma Park. I also want to ask you people out there to make sure that when you talk to people, when you go out, try to let the 16th and 17-year-old kids realize that now they are entering the beginnings of adulthood. They got the right to vote here in Tacoma Park, and that is an awesome responsibility. So I want you to tell everybody, including the schools, to ask the kids to really reflect on it and really learn how to vote and vote responsibly. And that's I'm not telling you who to vote for. I just want to tell you to vote with a good conscience. Let your conscience be your guide. Another thing I'd like to do is ask the people when if they find Confederate names on streets or buildings and stuff, when you remove them, replace them with names, promoting peace. Ask them, Lee Avenue could be Peace Avenue, Sherman Avenue could be Justice Road. We could name it in different ways like that. And I think that would be a good way to speak out, and it wouldn't be against anybody, pro or con. And I'd also like to ask the city of Tacoma Park, if they could, see if they could start a dispensary for the marijuana, medical marijuana, because eventually I may need it. And that the closest one that I understand now is going to be pretty far from here. And it's going to be all the way up in Frederick, Maryland, I understand. There might be one closer in Silver Spring. But I think it'd be also a good way for Tacoma Park to exert its power of being progressive. And I think that would be a great way to do it, to help a lot of people who can't or don't want to take the opiates. People are dying all the time from fentanyl abuse, and nobody seems to want to take that off the market. Why can't we replace that or accentuate that with marijuana, cannabis? Because the THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, has been proven to be helping with pain. And I'm one of the ones that it helped one time when I had a 5-year headache. Nobody could get rid of it for me. But I tried marijuana, and I haven't had that headache ever since. And that was 1992, 93. And I haven't had those crushing headaches and disfiguring all the time. I never had that. I was able to save my job until I went totally blind, because they didn't want me to work there if I couldn't raise my head up or open and close my mouth right. But we did beat it. And I want you guys to think about a dispensary in Tacoma Park for medical marijuana. Thank you very much. And don't forget to vote. 41 more days.
Okay, Mr. Edgell.
Madam Mayor, council members, I agree with Mr. Lovelace's comments. Please vote. And not soon enough, I might add. So, I have 2 other quick comments I'd like to mention. First is related to the Junction development. I am glad that the junction is going to be able to stay at its current location. I'm a supporter of the co-op rather than junction. I'm a supporter of the co-op. I'm a member of the co-op, and I shop there, and I want to make sure that any redevelopment at the junction allows the co-op to stay, and I'm happy with the council that I think you all support that as well, and I'm glad to see that. I do want to mention, though, that a parking lot isn't really doing anybody any good, particularly an underused parking lot. So I do want to see the redevelopment go forward, and it would have been great if the junction could be an anchor tenant, and maybe they can still work something out with the developer, who knows. But the development should move forward with the co-op at the junction. My second comment involves a letter which I think is going to be presented to you in a little bit on the Northern Bridge crossing. And while that may not seem like an issue that's Tacoma Park related, my perspective is there's a limited pot of money for projects that State Highways has and that the state is going to give out for projects. And it seems to me that if the money is used for a project that's unwise, that means there's less money for projects that we might want to do here in Tacoma Park. So I oppose it in part because it's a terrible environmental project, the bridge crossing, but also because it really is going to sap the resources that we probably need here for our state highways, which, as we know, sometimes the state doesn't always keep up on. Thank you.
Hey. Good evening. My name's Sharon Milgram. I live in Lincoln Avenue in Ward 3, and I'm speaking not only on my own behalf, but on behalf of my wife. Both of us are avid bicyclists. We bike for fun. We bike to go to work. We bike for shopping, and we bike to save the environment. And we bike on the sidewalk in Tacoma Park because biking on the street in Tacoma Park is not always safe. It is not safe anywhere during rush hour, and it is often unsafe even at quieter times because of the places where there are cutouts and places where it's really, really difficult to move safely. My wife was doored by a car coming up the street near the co-op. The person really didn't even have the patience to stop and make sure things were okay. And I don't really think it's up to any of you sitting there or even to the police, unless they are biking every day, to decide who is safe when, who feels safe on a bike. And I really think that to make a decision that we care for the children and their parents, but we don't care for other adults biking, seems counter to the nature of Tacoma Park. I've been living here 10 years, and I hear a lot about walkability, but I have seen very little meaning behind those words. This continues to be a car-dominated community, and there isn't really a lot of need for that. We have a lot of stores that are close by. There is no reason not to make a decision occasionally that benefits pedestrians or bicyclists. And I am really disappointed to see the change in tone around bicycling, particularly the comment that the risk for pedestrians outweighs the benefit to bicyclists. I don't know how you decide who is more important in a community, and in particular, I find that language to be a little bit disconcerting. I would ask that you reevaluate your decision and that you make sidewalk bicycling with safe speeds and giving right-of-way to pedestrians, what is the norm in Tacoma Park. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Seth Grimes, 7300 Willow Avenue. I've always wanted to raise this thing. Mr. Lovelace, I'll mention that there will be a medical marijuana dispensary on Fenton Avenue at the former Banner Glass location, which is not far off 410, so not far away from here. And I'll also mention that I feel like I'm a time warp looking at the audience here, but I will assure Council Members Qureshi, Schultz, and Mail that there's life after the council and you won't look back very often. So I'm here to take advantage of a provision of city code that allows the public to ask the mayor by letter for inclusion of an item on the council agenda. It's the item that was Mr. Edgell just referred to. I'm going to present this letter. I'm actually going to present the signers first and then make a remark about them and then read the letter. The signers of this letter are, in alphabetical order, Amy Byrne, Keith Berner, Bob Bingaman, Tony Camilli, Jack Carson, Lord Charkoudian, Cindy Dybala, who is here, Joe Edgell, Ken Firestone, myself, Cheryl Gross-Glazer, Lori Hill, Satjivan Ikle-Khalsa, David Moon, Ashley Nugent, Kathy Porter, Talisha Searcy, Jason Smalls, Greg Smith, Ruben Snipper, Mike Tidwell, Catherine Tunis, and the Tacoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee. The remark is that I formerly served as Tacoma Park's representative on the Transportation Planning Board, which I'm going to be mentioning in the letter. And preceding me was another signer, Ruben Snipper. And preceding Ruben, I believe, was Kathy Porter, who also chaired the TPB. The letter reads as following. Dear Mayor Stewart, the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board, TPB, is studying creation of an additional northern bridge crossing corridor that would connect Route 28 in Virginia to the Intercounty Connector in Maryland via a new Potomac River Bridge. The TPB is expected to vote in December on project inclusion in the Financially Constrained Long-Range Transportation Plan, CLRP. The CLRP identifies all significant capital improvements to the region's highway and transit systems that area transportation agencies expect to make and to be able to afford over the next 20-plus years. We oppose inclusion of an additional northern bridge crossing corridor project in the CLRP. The project would not serve Tacoma Park interests. It would be costly and environmentally destructive, unmerited by hypothetical transportation benefits. The connecting highway corridor would cross and degrade Montgomery County's agricultural reserve, including sensitive wetland areas, at great environmental and financial costs. We note that the three members of the Montgomery County Council who reside in Tacoma Park, Mark Elrich, George Leventhal, and Hans Riemer, joined their council colleagues in a unanimous July 2017 vote in opposition to the project. I'll beg a few extra seconds from you. We respectfully request that you schedule a City Council work session to discuss a Tacoma Park position on the proposed additional northern bridge crossing corridor and a vote on a resolution expressing the city's position. We further ask that the City Council, via that resolution, oppose further consideration of an additional northern bridge crossing corridor and to direct the city's TPB representative to vote against inclusion of any such project in the CLRP or any other plan. I think you probably all know what I'm talking about here. I'm sure some members of the public didn't. In any case, I would be happy to respond to any questions now, and look forward to your response to the request.
Thank you. And just to clarify for everyone, under our procedures, I just want to make sure people understand this is how we deal with this on the City Council when we get a request like this. We can either, one, a resident's request to place an item on the agenda shall be in writing and shall clearly state the issue, as Mr. Grimes just did. Upon receipt of the written request, the mayor shall determine whether the item is one for further council consideration or a matter which can be responded to in a follow-up letter by a directive for action to staff or by an administrative report at a future council meeting. If the matter does not lend itself to a clear resolution via the procedure delineated above, as I just read, the council at its next work session shall determine whether or not the matter shall be placed on the council agenda. The decision of the council shall be communicated to the resident making the request. So we'll take that under advisement, and I will confer with my colleagues and get back to you and the other signers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comments this evening?
Hi, I'm Susan Schreiber, 7323 Willow Avenue. I want to just express my appreciation for all the work that all of you have done on the Junction Development Project over the last, these many years. And to our Ward 1 representative, Peter Kovar, who has met with various community groups also many times, and really do appreciate that. And it's with some excitement and also apprehension that I'm looking forward to the presentation by NDC tonight. And you'll excuse me if I don't stay for it and watch it at home, because I'm here with my granddaughter, who's been zooming around here, who's a very avid co-op shopper, actually. Those of you who remember or are still in the process of taking children with you to the grocery store appreciate what a difference a small store makes as opposed to going to the giant. We're there at the co-op a lot. My apprehension is I'm hoping that the council and the community will really keep in mind the values and aspirations that we have for this very special site. and really help hold the developers' feet to the fire, because their agenda is bound to be different, somewhat different than ours. Will we have adequate space for community use and green space? Will we, the council itself will be responsible for interpreting the clause in the land development agreement that says that the co-op will be accommodated in terms of parking and unloading. So far, we have not seen a plan from NDC that, from the co-op's perspective, satisfies the need for loading and unloading in a safe and efficient manner. And I can only say that we really have to respect what the grocery store itself says it needs and really consider that very seriously. It's great that that NDC is going to acquire the extra property where the auto clinic is, and perhaps that might change the loading situation. And the other thing is is for the co-op to be able to remain open during construction, and I hope that there will be an opportunity to talk about that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I want to echo Susan Schreiber's. Well, first of all, my name is Diane Curran, and I live on Montgomery Avenue. I want to echo Susan Schreiber's appreciation for all the work that the council has done on the Junction development. The Junction's an important place to me. I shop at the co-op. I'm here tonight as a co-op shopper and supporter just to say I'm glad that NDC is making a presentation tonight. I hope that the presentation will address the concerns that have been raised here over the last couple years, principally the need for adequate unloading capacity, the need to have adequate parking, the need to resolve pedestrian and traffic safety, and the need to provide for continued co-op operation during whatever construction takes place. As is typical of these meetings, there's a public comment period followed by a long hiatus and then a presentation by NDC, and the public typically doesn't get an opportunity to speak after that. I would like to urge you to build in some opportunities for interaction with members of the public about the proposal so that everyone who's affected by it has a chance to give you their input. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Stewart and the City Council members. I'm Larry Himmelfarb, Valley View Avenue TP resident since 1981, also a longtime customer of the co-op. I do understand that NDC, as the previous speakers talked about, NDC will be making a presentation later tonight. I wanted to come this evening to express my strong support for making sure the proposal really does support the longevity of the co-op. We've been talking about adequate parking, a good loading dock, and that they preserve a market rent they can afford. I think there are really many examples of cities and states that provide generous incentives for businesses to remain in place. And from my past, I understand that retail operations such as grocery stores have a very slim margin and cannot afford to increase to their monthly rent to pay to the landlord. So I want to thank you for your leadership in helping to preserve the co-op. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Fred Feinstein. I live on Sycamore. It's nice to see you all. I'm also a member of the board of the co-op. Unfortunately, our chair couldn't make it tonight. She's at back to school night, but we do have several members of the board here. We also have our new acting General Manager, Martha Whitman, who many of you have had a chance to meet. So tonight's the night. We certainly look forward to hearing the presentation from NDC, and we look forward to working with NDC and with the council. People have addressed the important needs and concerns of the co-op regarding parking, in particular the loading dock, and also continuity of service. But again, we're very pleased that we're going to hear a plan tonight. We're ready, willing, and able to work with NDC and with the council to make sure that the important needs that several of the members of the co-op have addressed are met. Thank you.
Thanks. My name's Suzanne Lowen, 7002 Sycamore Avenue, Ward 3. It feels a little awkward to be commenting on development plans at the junction before hearing the latest update from NDC. And in their absence, I think, I don't know if a rep is here, but I trust that they will hear all of our comments at some point or read them. But I will state the things that matter to me the most regarding Tacoma Junction. So first, I am really genuinely afraid, maybe it's irrational, that Tacoma Junction will end up looking like every other vanilla suburb, and that Tacoma Park might, end up being strip malls. And, we had the, we now have CVS and Subway and Starbucks, and I think that supporting our local businesses is really integral to the maintaining the values of our community. The co-op's ability to survive and thrive feels very personal to me. I rely on the high-quality, locally sourced bulk food supplies for my cottage baking business. The co-op also serves a wide, diverse international community that looks to the bulk section for hard-to-find spices and staples. People travel across the D.C. region for the alternative medicinal products sold at the co-op, and the shelves are stocked with items that are ethically produced and locally sourced. As distinct from Whole Foods, TPSS sources directly from local producers and suppliers. It's owned and ultimately under the direct control of its members. In addition to offering ethical, healthy consumer alternatives, TPSS is the heart and hearth of this community. It's also a social hub where everything from recipes to politics are shared. The co-op is probably the one retail establishment in Tacoma Park that most enhances my own quality of life. An acceptable development plan would make clear accommodations for day-to-day operational needs of the co-op, would not exacerbate existing traffic problems, and would not jeopardize pedestrian safety. And thank you all for supporting these goals in going forward with development.
Hello, council members. I'm Rhonda Krantz. I'm at 5 Montgomery Avenue. And it has really been interesting to be coming here every few months, sometimes less, sometimes more, for ongoing discussion about the junction. I am, like my friends and neighbors have said, I'm really looking forward to hearing what the news from the developers. And I'd also like to state how important the co-op is to me. And I think it would just be wonderful if we can find a way that it works out for some really interesting development that will help the community and bring some jobs, but really not to focus on also keeping our real anchor to the community, the co-op, which would include finding a way to deal with the deliveries and parking and the whole neighborhood concerned obviously about traffic. So that would be part of the mix. I'm looking forward to that happening. I'm really hoping that will. I'd also, I'm going to take the opportunity to comment on bicycles. I didn't know about that, what you were dealing with the forget what it's called, I'm sorry. But and so as long as I'm here, I'll make a comment. I'm a biker. I feel very uncomfortable biking in a lot of places, as do many people, and I don't go certain ways on certain roads. And I think the idea of having certain streets, sidewalks to be available for bikes might make sense. I think that part of the real issue is education for bikers. It can be dangerous as a pedestrian. I'm a perfectly able, healthy person. And last week, I was basically kind of knocked off onto a fairly fast-moving cars on the sidewalk, off of the sidewalk, because a man and his daughter behind him, thinking they knew what they were doing and that they were being very careful, came up and said, "I'm on your left," although it was not enough time for me to even react, and went by. And then the daughter did the same thing. Now, there was no thought about how wide that road was, the fact that a pedestrian couldn't react that quickly, and I ended off the road. So I think that we need to do these things. We need to be thinking about education and other things. Maybe it's notes that say that maybe it's if you're going to have a bike on this sidewalk, you walk it. Whatever it might be. We have to find a way to do both, because biking is really important for the city too. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Maureen Taft Morales. I live on Pine Avenue. I want to echo the comments made about the co-op. I'm here to hear the presentation, and I just want to echo the sentiment that the co-op be preserved as a widely valued asset to this city, and how it needs to be able to continue to operate during the construction and have what it needs to continue to operate afterwards. And I hope that all of that will be addressed in the arrangements that you make with the developer. The other thing I want to bring attention to, I would ask that the council look into, or the city look into, and take measures to improve the safety of the intersection at Philadelphia and Tulip Avenues. It is dangerous for pedestrians, handicapped people in wheelchairs, and drivers. There is no light for traffic coming from Tulip. It's a blind curve. It's very dangerous to pull out there, and oncoming cars are certainly not expecting people to make left-hand turns into them when they have a green light. I would like to ask that you consider putting a light on the Tulip side of that intersection. And the other thing is that cars run that light daily. I cross that light going to and from work, and almost every day some car runs that red light. And often when I'm in the crosswalk and have the right of way, I have to triple check because cars are always running by. One day, 3 cars ran a full red light, and the last car was a police car, and a Tacoma police car. And I was hoping that they were going to ticket the first 2, and they weren't. They just strolled right through 2. And I actually called the police chief that day and said, but I have asked for them to ticket there, and I've never seen them doing it. And it's a dangerous sight, pedestrians, children going to parks, to and from the park and the schools. Handicapped people at the towers use that intersection, that crosswalk. So I would ask for increased enforcement at that intersection, and maybe consider a red light camera, or putting up a warning sign in the blind curve that there's a light ahead, just something to make it a safer intersection.
Carol.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sorry. Carol and Tulip right in front of the towers. And then quickly, the last thing is that a new walk light was placed there, and it was placed in the middle of the handicap access ramp and in the middle of the sidewalk. It seems to be in violation of all kinds of safety conditions, I would think, but it also makes it very difficult for wheelchairs from Victory Towers to navigate between that new light and the bus stop, and I would ask that it be removed and placed at a safer location. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can corroborate. I didn't see the same police officer, but I was actually stopped at that red light on my bike, and a Tacoma Park police officer ran that red light right next to me, whom I also caught up with in front of the fire station, and his window was down, and I asked him what he thought about that, and he said he had not run a red light. Be that as it may, I didn't follow up, but it was upsetting. I'm TJ Matthews. I've lived only in Tacoma Park for 18 years compared to people who've been here many decades. I've been a member of the co-op for 25 years. I was a member of the board. When I came to a meeting about a year ago, the thing that encouraged me the most, and I'm sorry that Tim's not here to hear this, but after many of us spoke about emotional and practical issues affecting the co-op, it was the words of members of the council that put me at ease, realizing that you all shop at the co-op, that you care about the co-op. And I hope that it's still the case. Thanks.
I'm Andy Penn, and I'm a longtime resident of Tulip Avenue. I wasn't going to speak about this, but I agree with what Maureen said about Tulip and Carroll. It's a little dangerous, especially when I'm trying to make the car. But mainly I'm here to talk about to echo what everyone else has said about the co-op. I'm a customer of the co-op, a member of the co-op, and in addition to everything they've said, I think it's important to remember that it is the only local grocery store here in the area. I don't want to have to do my shopping at 7-Eleven when I'm no longer able to drive, or when it's the only place to go. So it's very important to keep the co-op going, and to make sure that this proposal takes into account the ability of the co-op to continue to exist, and with particularly adequate unloading and parking. Thank you.
Good evening, Colleen Cordes, Ward 1, and thank you for having public comments, as always. It's wonderful. I brought a couple of props. I'm here to speak as a member of the co-op because I just love what the co-op's all about and how Tacoma Parky it is. So this was a page A3 story in the Post. Farm labor, dirty, difficult, sometimes fatal. Gruesome deaths in manure ponds rattle Idaho's dairy industry. And it's all about how these huge dairies, which provide cheap milk for, like Safeway and Giant, they have thousands of cows, and they have these huge manure ponds, and then they have immigrant labor who come in and have not been trained and aren't given the breaks they're supposed to have, horrible working conditions. And then they sometimes fall into these manure ponds and drown or become asphyxiated. So that's the picture of what the alternative to the co-op is in many communities. And this is Hawthorne Valley Yogurt, which you can find, and it's a totally different story. They have 60 cows. It's organic and biodynamic. Each cow has a name. It's incredibly delicious yogurt. I believe it's $4.69 still. So it's not as cheap as what you'll find at other big grocery stores, but it's not incredibly expensive either. And what they do with their manure, their cow manure, is they have carefully tended compost piles, and they use that to restore the fertility of the land. So they have a cycle of life that goes on there. It's holistic. It's triple bottom line. They have wonderful things for the community. They bring 1,200 children every year to come and learn there. These are the kind of companies, dozens of small and medium-sized, maybe hundreds of small and medium-sized companies that the co-op is a gatekeeper for, and brings and helps and basically contributes to the health of our community. And the council has this opportunity to nurture this incredible progressive, the vision for the future, by really making sure that the actions in redeveloping the junction keep the co-op strong, And so obviously there's the parking needs, there's the keeping in operation while the development's going on, there's the loading area. And if the co-op was going to be part of the development, there'd have to be some more reasonable talk about the rental rate there. But overall, I just hope the council will think of the junction in triple bottom lines: the social impact, the ecological impact, and the economic vibrancy. I was a little concerned about your agenda because it seemed to focus tonight just on the economic redevelopment and the tax benefits. I hope you go back and re-embrace that truly broad triple line aspiration. And thank you for your leadership on this issue.
Second time today. Thank you for listening. Mary Jane Machui, Ward 2, 404 Boyd Avenue. One thing that the co-op doesn't seem to care about that much is helping disabled people, hiring qualified disabled people. One time, somebody came here and bragged in front of the council about how many nationalities the co-op employed, but they didn't say anything about disabled people. My son is disabled, but he's a qualified worker. He has to take an hour and a half each way to get to his low-cost job in Bethesda now as a doorman, and he's done cashier work, and he's very capable. But when he applied for a job at the co-op, that didn't even answer him, acknowledge his receipt of his application. He was very depressed about that, because we only live 4 miles from the co-op, and we lived where we lived before the co-op was even there, by the way. So please, please consider hiring qualified disabled people. I'm not asking you to hire people who can't do anything. Qualified, hardworking, disabled people. Please do. Thank you.
Any other public comments this evening? No, we'll move now to council comments. Any council comments this evening? Councilmember Schultz.
Well, got to keep the conversation going here. We can't be silent, huh?
We can keep it going because we also have a presentation this evening. So.
Just a couple things. I think we ought to recognize some things that have been happening in Tacoma Park that have been exciting and very positive, and just so that people who are listening and hear about these things. A week or so ago, we had the ribbon cutting on the community kitchen at the Presbyterian Church in Ward 1. There was an enormous crowd of people there. I was delighted to be part of it and got to see the kitchen, something that has been very controversial for a very long time. It is now open and functioning. It's functioning as a small business food preparation incubator, and we all should be proud of that. The second thing was that the Washington Adventist University opened up its brand new health professions building, which is part of its educational campus, but it also has physical fitness facilities in there that they are making available to the community at large. And that building has been under construction for the last couple of years. Big addition to the university and to its health and comprehensive studies program. And third, I wanted to mention we had a mayor's meeting at El Campeon Restaurant up on Merrimack Drive, which is near the intersection of Carroll Avenue and University, and I had the opportunity to talk to the owner of the El Campeon restaurant and learned about some problems that business was having with regard to loiterers hanging around and annoying customers and that sort of thing. The point that I mentioned it is that this is the sort of thing that we need businesses to tell us about so that we can do something about it. And I'm working to try to arrange an a meeting for the police department to come out and meet with the owner and myself and Melanie Isis, who is the head of the Crossroads Development Authority, and maybe some other people to kind of get a comprehensive understanding of what the concerns are of the several small businesses that are situated in that corner. of our city. And just wanted to mention that because it's an example of what we need to be doing is to try to help our small businesses as well as our residents to survive and be prosperous. And I'm delighted to be able to do whatever we're able to do. So I just mentioned those three things. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. Just one brief point, and maybe the city manager could check on this. Earlier, I believe it was last year, toward the end of last year, when Pepco was doing the tree trimming, there were some concerns raised by folks from North Tacoma, and concerns that I shared, and I believe at the time we talked about there would be a better, clearer, more comprehensive or transparent presentation of where the tree trimming was going to be taking place. And that may still happen, but I was talking to a constituent today in the on Willow Avenue near the Old Town area who mentioned that he was in receipt of a letter indicating that in that area it was going to start up. And again, I'm not per se opposed to the tree trimming if it's necessary to keep the wires intact, but it seemed to suggest that it was about to start up again, and we hadn't really heard anything. So if you could inquire, I would appreciate that. Or maybe you know something about it.
Actually, I mentioned it last week. We have been in receipt of Pepco's interest in doing their next round of tree trimming. We're working with them to gather a lot of information first. We've not given any approvals because we want to get that and then have that information shared with you.
Okay.
And yes, they put out information to residents, but we are also following up with those residents.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilmember Freshy.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a very quick point for the city manager. And I actually meant to reach out to the mayor and Councilmember Mail, although this is in my ward. This is smack dab in the middle of both of their houses. At the corner of Beach and Sycamore, I received an email from a resident about the concern of seeing a lot of rats lately. Gray rats. I didn't know there was different colors, but I guess they're seeing them during the day. There's a standing mulch pile there and also some compost, which may be attracting them. The question really pertains to, in the event that the residents want to do something collectively to address this issue, what assistance the city can provide. I don't know if there are safe types of poison that we can direct them to. And poison doesn't sound safe.
We'll follow up with you next week. Generally, we try to coordinate with the county on issues related to rats. But there may be some, as you said, there may be something that also could be addressed that helps ameliorate the problem. So.
Thank you.
And you're
That's
right,
all
I am very interested in this. This is
yeah, it's right up the road from you.
It's a house away from me. Councilmember Smith.
A couple of things. One, I want to mention that tomorrow the Montgomery County chapter of MML will have their first meeting. This will be hosted by the city of Gaithersburg. The guest for tomorrow's meeting will be Gabe Albernazzo, director of the county's recreation department and co-chair of the county executives advisory group on age-friendly Montgomery. And that's primarily what the discussion is going to be about tomorrow. I would like to take the time to thank Mayor Bridget Newton, Mayor Mike Callahan of Cheverly, former Mayor Bruce Williams, and Gabe for being guests on the television show that I'm producing for the Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Municipal League. At the tapings, we talked about the tax duplication issue with the county, highway user revenue, which is a priority for the legislative committee of the Maryland Municipal League, and the county services that are available for seniors. I would like to let my colleagues know that at this fall's MML conference being hosted by the City of Rockville, there will be a forum on SHA and utilities. So if you have any questions, you can present them there. The forum will be moderated by Cheverly Mayor Mike Callahan. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I have just a couple of items. Last week, we had Play Week, and it culminated in Play Day. So I just want to thank all the volunteers, our rec department who helped out with that, and Pat Rumbar, our Play Lady. Also, last Saturday was the Tacoma Park Foundation Beer Fest, which was a wonderful evening and an event that they put on every year. An issue that continues to be an issue, which is the problem we're having with State Highway in Tacoma Junction and the shifting over of the light signals. I spoke with the State Highway Administrator last Thursday. Was promised something was going to happen very soon. I talked to him today before our meeting, and he said he's still investigating it. So I'm not sure why it is taking so long. I've also been in communication with our State Senator Will Smith, so hopefully we will get that fixed very soon. The other thing that I think is in the city manager's comments, but I wanted to announce, is that our youth council applications are now open for our youth council. They are on the city website. So young people in grades 7 through 12 who live in the city and are interested in serving on the council, we have paper applications as well as those on the city website. They can check that out. And we're hoping to have all the youth apply, the council confirm them, and have them be recognized the same time that our new city council is sworn in. So we're going to try and do this pretty quickly. And while we're talking about young people and engaging them, the Recreation Department, with the help of our resident, Wayne Sherwood, are putting together a voter forum for young people on November 2nd. It'll be here in the Azalea Room from 6:30 to 8:30, I believe. But double check the time. But the date's definitely right, November 2nd. So please spread the word on that as well. And I'll turn it over. Oh. Yes, Mr. Siemens.
Mayor, I'm sorry to turn my light on late tonight. My mind was having trouble getting past the manure pond. My wife and I are going to be volunteering this weekend on Saturday to staff the farmers market, a booth at the farmers market in Anacostia. And we'd really like to have some help. So if there's any volunteers out there who would like to spend the morning selling fruits and vegetables to people who really need those fruits and vegetables, we would appreciate your help. If you could give me a call, I would be thrilled at 240-793-5108. If you have food you'd like to bring down, we could sell that too. Thank you.
Great. Now I will turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you. Before I go over the couple of comments that I've prepared, I do want to follow up on the state highway problems at the junction, because the slowdown of the contractor is also part of the problem of the Tulip and Carroll intersection, and the reason that the handicap signals are in the wrong place, and a variety of things. So it is a serious problem that we are trying to address. Following up from last meeting, Councilmember Qureshi reported a problem with a sidewalk around 7501 Carroll, and we did find that that was a problem with utility repair that we're asking the utility company to correct. Councilmember Kovar asked for a report back to council on the markings, the different kind of trial markings that we've been doing to show where people might park and not park, that it's different than yellow curbs. Test markings were done on Sherman, Hancock, and Fifth Avenue. We've received very little comment on those, so if you want to check with your constituents about how those are received, appreciate it. We will incorporate kind of recommendations to move forward on this with the parking recommendations that are forthcoming. There was some listserv confusion and concern that perhaps the Tacoma Park Fire Station would not be getting a paramedic this year, and that's not the case. We are getting the paramedic. After all, there was some information that there was some money to fund paramedics at other stations, and people thought that that meant it wasn't in Tacoma Park. The Tacoma Park Station should be able to be added in April of 2018. This past weekend, we had a number of thefts from auto. So there was quite a little spate. We just want people to be aware of that. We've got police following up on a number of leads to catch those responsible. There's always the important thing about take your valuables out of your car and lock your car. But also report if you think you see somebody going around and testing car doors, please call the police. The mayor mentioned the youth council applications we're excited about. Last week, Councilmember Smith announced the $160,000 Transportation Alternatives Program funds for Tacoma Park for sidewalks related to safe routes to schools. We will be having coming up next week a little trial in the back parking lot where the wooden steps come down from Tacoma Park Elementary to see if we can divert people from using that and if there's ways to do that so that we have a safer way for children coming out of the school. October 4th is Walk to School Day, so we're looking forward to that. It's always a good time. And we're also accepting vendor applications for Tacoma Park Holiday Art Sale. Holidays already. We do have a lot of advertising out for positions within the city. There has been information out about the police chief search. On the website is also kind of a brief summary of the steps that we're going through in that police chief search. But we do have many other positions, so if people are interested, please go to the career section of the Tacoma Park website. That's it.
Great. Any questions for the city manager?
If I may. I'm very concerned about loitering at the little business intersection at the intersection of East-West Highway and New Hampshire Avenue. There's three particular businesses there. The Shager Market, which is an Ethiopian-oriented shop, Photo Art Press, which is what brings us to my attention, and Jason's Sub Shop. My wife goes to the Photo Art Press because one of the things they do, among the many things, is specialize in restoration of old photos, and they're doing an excellent job. But my wife Nancy has found that whenever she tries to park in the vicinity and walk to that store, she's being followed by loiterers who are begging rather aggressively, both when she's going towards the shop and coming out. And the store owner, John Kirkoshian, who I know and has been there, I guess, about 5 years. It's a very popular business, by the way. Is just fit to be tied because he's losing business.
Follow up.
But let me just add that I understand that the Ethan Allen Gateway project will be modifying that area, the sidewalk and the parking and all that. So I'd hope your follow-up could sort of inform us as to how that might help improve the situation there. Thank you.
All right, now we'll move on to our voting session. Our first item is the second reading ordinance amending the City Code, Chapter 13.16, Special Traffic Regulations. And I know we have our city attorney with us. I didn't know if the city attorney wanted to discuss the changes that were made from the first reading to the second reading.
And also the subsequent information that was passed out today.
Okay.
Sure. The council requested a few changes as a result of the first reading. One is was to clarify when people using the bike share stations when they're allowed to ride on the sidewalk, and so it's between the curb cut and the bike share station when they're going to and from the bike share station that they can ride on the sidewalk. And the I'm sorry, it's a little hard to tell on this document what the other change from first
It's on the
reading
cover
was.
sheet, isn't it?
I'm sorry, was it the decision to allow children 12 and younger to ride on the sidewalk?
That's right. So we went through I think we added in the extra information about adults who are actively supervising a child or children 12 years of age or older, or younger may ride bicycles on the sidewalks as well. So I think we went through all of those points the last time. The newer information is the additional suggested language from E that talks about safety of pedestrians.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let others bring
I think
that
that's it. Yeah.
Right. Since then, Council Member Kovar raised the issue of kind of the rights as between cyclists who are lawfully on the sidewalk and pedestrians. And so we added a provision that essentially says pedestrians have the right of way and must slow down when approaching a pedestrian and watch out for them.
Great. All right. Would someone like to move the ordinance? Councilmember Qureshi, would I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Kovar, any questions or any comments on this? Councilmember Qureshi, is your light on?
It's not on as it pertains to the document.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Kovar, did you have something?
I was just going to say, I think through the conversations that we've had, this has ended up in a pretty good place from my point of view. I confess that I was nervous about allowing bicycles on sidewalks. I think it's a judgment call either way. There's hazards to cyclists on streets, particularly narrow streets. There's hazards to pedestrians associated with cyclists on sidewalks. I think some of the commentators touched on various of those situations tonight. I think where we've ended up is a kind of a sensitive response to that, because it will potentially allow, in certain cases, subject to administrative work by the city manager with opportunity for public comment, to designate certain areas. By the same token, though, it has in place some protections for pedestrians as well. And my hope is that everybody will follow the rules and behave responsibly, as they should. But I think the one additional point that I brought up, and the city attorney suggested language to address that, which would be to make it clear that in a situation, if there is a grant of authority to ride on sidewalks, that the cyclists will be required to yield to pedestrians. So to me, with that change, I think this is a good package.
Great. Councilmember Qureshi?
Thanks, Mayor. The only comment that I wanted to make, and I'm only making it because Councilmember Kovar made a comment, is specifically what we discussed over email today, which is on the cover sheet, which is what was raised by Mr. Edgell in regards to crosswalks. I know that this will be an administrative process, but the example used by Mr. Edgell of a road up in Brockville and Veers Mill, I think there are streets, state highways here in Tacoma Park that are akin to that. New Hampshire Avenue is one of them. So I'd ask the city manager to pay close attention to significant crosswalks that pose a significant danger to pedestrians and bikers alike, and focus on those consistent with the city attorney's recommendation that we would fall under state law that's going to be, I guess, going to effect on October 1st, so long as the adjacent sidewalks are I guess, accepted by the city manager.
Right. Let me just clarify for those watching, and that is that, and Ken, you can correct me if I say anything wrong here, that basically the protections of bike riders in a crosswalk, crossing a street, only will apply as of October 1 if both ends of the crosswalk, the sidewalks on each side, do allow bicyclists to be on the sidewalk. And so that's something that we would be very careful about identifying where we felt it was appropriate. If we felt that the crosswalk was important to allow a bicyclist to ride that crosswalk, we would have each end of that crosswalk be a place where bicyclists could go. But there is quite a lot of weight, I think, given both to pedestrian safety and to just the particular situation of that particular street. I think it is a case-by-case basis.
Right. Thank you, Mayor.
Great. Thank you. And I just want to weigh in and just thank again the Safe Roadways Committee for all their work on this. I know some folks came tonight and were like, oh, wow, the city council is talking about this. But in fact, we've had numerous work sessions on this and discussions, and I want to just extend my thanks again to all the hard work of our Safe Roadways Committee and the information they provided us. We have had numerous work sessions on this. This was not an easy decision. I think for many of us, we've gone back and forth and weighed the different options and in balancing the safety of all our residents. And I agree with Councilmember Kovar that I think this, this strikes a right balance for us for right now. The things are changing and not as fast as we would like them to in making it safer in our community for bike riders, and we have to continue to push State Highway and the county to do these things, and we will continue to do that. But I am happy with where we landed here, and it also doesn't mean that we can't revisit this in a year or two after we have the administrative rules in place. So I just want to, again, thank everyone for their hard work on this. And I'm going to ask the clerk to take the roll. Do we have to move it because it was, or?
No, this language just arrived this week. This wasn't from last week.
Right,
so
but
we
since
need to read that. It needs to be an amendment.
Amended, okay. So Councilmember Kovar, do you want to amend it? All right, I'll move it in.
We should, doesn't know. We should read it.
Okay.
I'm
You
sorry,
wanna read it?
I just wanted to make a couple quick points for you all to think about as you're voting on this. And one is that bicycles are typically treated like vehicles under the rules of the road. So it's not, it's not kind of a outlandish decision not to allow bicycles on the sidewalk. And two, a lot of people are looking at this as a safety issue, and are we protecting cyclists? But really, it's a liability issue. I mean, the fact is, no matter what the law is, pedestrians, cyclists, people walking their bikes, need to stop at the crosswalk and make sure that a car is, willing and able to stop for them before they step in front of it. So, I don't think this ordinance is putting cyclists in danger. It's just a question of kind of what the vehicle's liability is if they hit somebody in a crosswalk.
So Councilmember Kovar, do you have it in front of you? Would you like to read it?
So this would be a new...
I'll turn on your microphone so people can hear you.
Sorry. This would be a new paragraph E, and I appreciate the city attorney's work to draft this. I asked the question, and this is what resulted. Under all circumstances, the persons riding bicycles on sidewalks shall yield the right-of-way to pedestrians using the sidewalk, and due and proper care shall at all times be exercised by the rider for the protection of pedestrians. When approaching a pedestrian on the sidewalk, the speed of a bicycle shall be reduced to a speed that is no greater than necessary to continue the operation of the bicycle without the rider dismounting, and shall not be increased until the rider has passed the pedestrian.
Okay. Would I have a second to that amendment?
Second.
Councilmember Qureshi, any discussion of that amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Now will the clerk please call the roll for the ordinance?
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember Mayo. Councilmember Qureshi.
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Schultz.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right. Now that takes us to our next voting item, which is the first reading ordinance authorizing execution of a payment in lieu of taxes agreement for Parkview Towers, 7667 Maple Avenue. Does someone like to move this ordinance?
So
Councilmember Siemens moves it. Councilmember Schultz seconds. Discussion, any questions or?
This was discussed fairly heavily last week.
Yeah, at the work session. So, and I just want to thank the representatives from AMHP for coming to the work session and coming tonight and staying through all the public comment and everything. So with no discussion or questions.
I got it.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Go ahead.
Did city staff make my concerns known to Victory Housing, or is that, do we know?
Yes, we
We're
shared
not
all-
up to Victory Housing yet. This is
But
the MHP.
we did share all the comments with the two parties.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have a question on this one or a comment? Okay. All those in favor of the execution of a payment in lieu of taxes for 7667 Maple Avenue, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No? All right. We're good on that one. Next, we have the first reading ordinance executing a pilot for 6776 Houston Avenue. Would someone like to move that? Councilmember Smith, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Qureshi. Discussion on this one? And we have representatives from Victory Housing
Yes.
here if we have questions for them.
I'm not sure that there's a lot that I can say. I'm not sure. Mr. Spencer, would you like to say a few words to this? No?
Well, I made a statement during the public
Mhm.
comment. If you have any other questions about Cambridge or Winslow, I'm happy to answer them.
Anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I was just curious, if I may, what is the number of units in each of the properties that we're looking at?
Cambridge Apartments has 33 apartments, and Winslow House, which is right across the street, has 46 apartments.
Okay.
Again, staff recommends approval as a way to assist. It's one of the few tools that we have for affordable housing at this point.
And lastly, I asked about capacity building at the properties. Did you guys, staff, talk about that? How you guys would do that?
How to work with the tenants on.
Yeah, I mean, we have, actually, as I mentioned in my remarks, we've recently renovated the community room at Cambridge Apartments. Winslow House does not have any community space per se, so that space is used between the two properties. The management company, we have a third-party management company that manages those properties. They do programming for resident activities in that space, and we'll do more once it's reopened.
And what type of programming do you offer?
Well, we have some. We have it varies. I mean, they're responsible for it. There has been some in the past afternoon activities for the children. We do a lot of work with the city. If there's if people want to make presentations, that kind of thing, along those lines.
Okay.
Great. All right. Seeing no other questions or comments, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Next, we have the first reading ordinance authorizing a pilot agreement for Winslow House at 666 Houston Avenue. Would someone like to move this? Councilmember Qureshi, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilmember Siemens, any questions or comments on this? All those in favor of this ordinance, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much. Now we will move on to our work session, which is a presentation of the concept plan for Tacoma Junction redevelopment. Who do we?
We're going to have some.
Switch.
Have some things come up. I can speak first as the other folks are. I'm sorry. You need 3 minutes.
Okay.
All
right. Well, we can take a break for 3 minutes, and we will start right at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
All right. Sounds good. I could use a little break. Mayor.
Well, I'll start when there's, is there a council?
Councilmember Schultz, Deputy City Manager. We're starting.
Councilmember Siemens?
Come on. Councilmember Siemens? It's the danger of having a break.
Come on up here, buddy.
Okay, well, why don't I go ahead and get started?
Yeah.
I just have a couple slides up front because one of the questions that comes up periodically is, gee, Tacoma Junction's been going on a long time. Is everything now just going to be approved and there's no other point for public comment? And so I just want to go a little bit over what some of the upcoming steps are. I can have the next slide, please. So what we've done in the past,
I don't have
from 2014, the release of the Tacoma Junction RFP till tonight, which is you'll first
Sorry,
see
Ms. Liddell, I'm going to interrupt you. We are
some of the monitors aren't working.
They're kind of flickering.
Now mine's okay.
Almost.
I got two, neither one of them.
Subliminal.
So you still don't have it?
Mm-mm.
It's not very much here, but you're going to want to see the presentation by NDC.
Yeah.
We could just end the meeting. I mean, all these people are here for
It's
the
not
bikes
up
on
to me.
sidewalks, right?
If this doesn't work, then some of the council members can
We'll just
sit in
sit
the audience
Yeah,
because it
that's
is
fine.
up on the big screens.
No, I can just, we can just sit down there. Yeah, we're.
Okay. So some people have it and some don't, or do you have it? So our side's a good, well, we're the left side, so get it. Okay. So just to go over the timeline related to the Tacoma Junction development process, began in January of 2014. We had community open houses, public meetings in 2015. We signed, the council signed the development agreement with NDC in August of 2016. In February and March of this year, we had the community consultation process meetings, and I think that a lot of the information from tonight comes from the information and the surveys that were done during that community consultation process. And tonight you'll begin reviewing the concept plan. Could I have the next slide, please? And you can just go ahead and to the next slide. So the opportunities for public input and kind of the process right now is that once the council has kind of accepted the concept plan, that plan will be starting to go through a variety of public agencies. One is the Tacoma Park Facade Advisory Board for its comments, which then go to the County Historic Preservation Commission for its comments and approvals. The site plan then comes back to the Tacoma Park City Council for its approval, and that's the critical piece because it won't move forward if the Tacoma Park City Council does not approve the site plan. And after that, it would go to the Montgomery County Planning Board. All of these are public processes. I think there's going to be a good amount of discussion, but I just wanted to kind of give people a sense that over the next year, there will continue to be a lot of discussion of what these look like. And so I'll turn it over now to NDC, and we'll see what their concept plans are. I'm sorry, Mayor. Welcome.
Everything's out now.
Yeah, why don't you go now? There's nothing out there either. Oh, they were just calling it up. Okay. Well, how did that happen? So mine was just not good. Ah, okay. Well, welcome, Dee. Can you turn on? There we go. Now you're on.
Okay. All right. There we go. Welcome. It's good to see everyone. Is that good? Is that better?
Just talk normal.
Erase this. Oh, I see.
So we're having lots of fun.
There it is. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So we wanted to first thank everyone for their input during the community consultation process. It was very helpful for us and our design team, StreetSense, with altering the plans and tweaking the plans. We've done a lot over the last several months. We went and met with Park and Planning and got a fair amount of feedback from Park and Planning, which was more of an informal meeting, and then subsequently had a meeting with the DRC, the Development Review Committee of Montgomery County, and got a ton of feedback from them as well. I just think it's been a great process, and we're excited about the plan that we're going to show you tonight. We also wanted to definitely give thanks to several of the council members who aren't going to be here after the election. Some folks who are not running, and we certainly enjoyed working with you during this last several years, as we just spoke about. So Councilmember Qureshi, Councilmember Mail, and Councilmember Schultz. So definitely wanted to thank you, and I'm sure you guys will still be pretty active in the community, so we look forward to working with you. And for the rest of the council and the mayor who are running, we wish you the best of luck. Most of you are definitely running unopposed, so I'm quite sure you're going to be around. But for those of you who are opposed, we look forward to working with you in the future as well. So with that, I want to turn it over to StreetSense. StreetSense is going to present our plans and talk a little bit about the results of the community consultation process. And so I'll introduce Colin.
Thanks, Dee. Good to be back. We're going to go tonight through the concept plan and a little bit of backtracking just to kind of show how we got here. Appreciate the city manager's description of kind of how we've gotten to this point. It has been a long process, but it's been very rewarding in being able to work with the community and get to the point where we are this evening. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been up to since the last time we were here and with the community back in the early spring of this year. Talk a little bit about that concept plan, explain what it is that has resulted in terms of a development plan moving forward, and then some of our next steps and just a little bit more detail about how we're going to continue to work with the community. There are a couple of bullet points on this sheet about the things that we've been up to. Dee mentioned a few of them. We've incorporated some of that feedback from the community consultation process, which included a few meetings in the community with community members, questions, answers, more questions, continuing to try to drive toward answers. We presented those results of the survey to the council a few months back, and we've taken those results really to heart and trying to establish something that is going to be beneficial and contribute to the community. Between then and now, the size of the site has increased because NDC has been successful in doing an acquisition of the Tacoma Auto Clinic, which was sort of to our western side. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We have met with Park and Planning. When we met with them, we wanted to sort of give them, in the similar way that we met with the community, sort of a taste of what we were up to, understand what kinds of touch points there were going to be, what kinds of things would be warmly welcomed, what kinds of things we would be challenged with. So based on two different concept plans that we had kind of running simultaneously, we were helped along with understanding which one would be really more fitting for the neighborhood. So based on that, the results of those conversations, as Dee said, they were informal, but they were willing to meet with us to understand how we could build trust together, we've developed a single plan that we're going to share this evening. We also met with their Development Review Committee, which is helpful because it means that we take all of the resources that they have, the different agencies working together, and instead of thinking about the project sort of through one lens, we get great feedback from different agencies working together and seeing how traffic and transportation, parks and open space, building code, et cetera, kind of work together to do the best plan. We got some good feedback from them as well, and we think that what we have tonight is the culmination of that, is the plan that's going to provide the greatest benefit to the community, and that will have the support of those agencies moving forward. So, as I said, we came in front of you a few months back to talk about all of those elements that we spoke with the community about. When we look at a project like this, it's not just about style, it's not just about traffic concerns, it's about all of those things, but simultaneously. So we talked about the project in terms of its form and character. It's vital for a project that occupies a location like this to be of Takoma Park and to reflect the community. And we see that as happening through its form and its character rather than style or detail. How people can get to it. Takoma Park is a great place to think about doing a development project because you actually can not just pay lip service to the idea that there are bicycles and pedestrians and people choosing to walk to a place that's part of their neighborhood rather than taking their car, dumping it in a parking lot and sort of enjoying some time there and then leaving. Access and mobility was a huge component and continues to be a huge component of what we're trying to do here. We know that we want the building form to include interior space that's welcoming. This is something that, again, I think we've said it many times before in the public venues that we've been a part of, that it's important for people to feel like this is their place. As much as it's a private endeavor, it's also a place that we want people to feel welcome in and feel like it's a part of the neighborhood. The public realm was also an important component. It's a small site, so it can't deliver everything there is to be delivered in Takoma Park in one package, but we think we can do a lot of good with great streetscape, with good plantings, with understanding how sustainable a project like this can truly be. So, we did increase the size of the site through acquisition. NDC has purchased the property. It's better from a transportation perspective. As you may remember, we had issues with how people might get into the site around a corner that comes from eastbound traffic. This helps us get better aspects and better distance sighting in that regard. From a programming perspective, we think we can build a better experience by having more frontage along Carroll Avenue. That retail experience, which our ground floor is intending to be 100% retail, really would benefit from having as much frontage along Carroll and the high visibility and enjoying the vibrant street as possible. Oh. Do I get to drop this mic? Go? Okay. All right. Wow, that is better. I sound great. We think that all of those things combined make this a project that's better for the city. And the feedback that we've gotten from Park and Planning, as we said, generally positive. They have very specific questions about how this will move through the process, how we will manage things like traffic, loading, et cetera, which we'll get into in a moment. Loading and access really have continued to be one of the primary challenges. And I say it as a challenge because I think we can all solve it. I think we have to solve it through a number of different avenues. They have mentioned, much like we heard a little bit this evening, that bicycle and pedestrian accommodations are preferred. Not just they have to be there, but it's really preferred, and that's still even a little bit of a light word, about people being able to get to this site easily and safely by bicycle and on foot. that there is some dedication that would be required through this process if we're able to move forward with the scheme that we have for deliveries and loading, and we're anticipating going ahead and doing that. That the massing and the scale of the project in terms of its square footage and its bulk seem appropriate, that the parking approach that we're advocating works. So those are some of the positive feedback things that we've gotten. Their issues, like Tacoma Park's issues, from a planning standpoint, continue to be that sort of loading and service and making sure that people can get in and out comfortably. From the form and character side, these are some of the results that we got back. Just some of the images as you remember, when we did our public engagement strategy, we provided lots of different imagery things. We talked with people. We weeded out why people were looking at certain images or had a distrust of others. But at the end of the day, we see a deep market in this part of Tacoma Park for food and beverage, and we would love to offer distinctive restaurants that have some outdoor cafe seating, something that enlivens the street, something that is of the neighborhood. We also see a demand for office space and have a second floor that's devoted to office space that's somewhat unique. This is not an office building, but a place that someone potentially from the neighborhood could work and really enjoy being in. From the public realm side, again, we see a less opportunity to build a park and more opportunity to really enliven streetscape, provide greenery, and provide something that is in keeping with the context of this part of Tacoma Park. And that can be done in spaces that are 100% public and spaces that are semi-private, some of these spaces that may come into the building or be used by private endeavors. There are opportunities for public art. Art is a huge component of what makes Tacoma Park so great. We want to work with the community in determining what is that public art and how can it be manifested on a site like this. We see opportunities for wide sidewalk, benches, lots of greenery, and covered areas that could keep you out of the weather but still outdoors. This is the vicinity map. This actually reflects the additional ground. If you look at the left-hand side, we're up against the Healy building now, encompassing the Tacoma Auto Clinic. And you'll also notice that the entirety of the property actually goes all the way down to Columbia Avenue, but we'll talk about that in a moment. We're really kind of essentially, from a development standpoint, disregarding that part of the site. It's too steep. It's fully treed. It's not something that we want to sort of be entangled in terms of development. It will become important in terms of how the site gets approved and what kinds of conditions need to remain and what can be disturbed, et cetera. So that will be a component that we will be talking about as we move forward. This is, sorry for the fuzzy quality of this, this is sort of the new dimension of the site. And the bottom's purposefully kind of cut off because that's the part we're not really discussing. You'll notice that where the words City of Tacoma Park are, that's the parking lot. The two vertical slices to the left of it are the Tacoma Auto Clinic, and then the piece just to the left of that is actually a site that we already had under control, but there was a gap with the Tacoma Auto Clinic. So we're all the way up to the Healy building. And as it said on the last slide, about 1 1/3 acre total for the entire site. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've been up to in terms of a concept plan. And I'm going to show you a few plan diagrams because when you work on a site this tight and next door to a great neighbor like the Co-op and the Healy building, you're looking at a fairly flat site just for a certain depth. It's a constrained site. So we're going to look at this through plans first, starting below grade. We have one level of parking that we are proposing. You would enter the parking from Carroll Avenue, traveling eastbound or westbound into our ramp, which is at the far left side of this, and drop down to a subgrade single level of parking. We've determined that we can fit about 72 parking spaces of regular size in that box. That box just happens to be about 125 feet deep, and which is a nice module to work with structure and parking. And it is basically against the buildings on both sides.
So basically one flat deck. It has an elevator and staircase in it so that customers, visitors, people can come up straight up to the uses above. On the retail level, which is essentially the grade level, so this is at the sidewalk level on Carroll Avenue, we're proposing essentially retail uses. Anything that you see in the sort of red-brown colors are what we're proposing right now as being single retail tenants. They could be combined. These could be larger users, but those are the sort of 25 and 30-foot wide retail bays that work for a variety of different types of uses. The depths of these boxes are about 70 to as much as 85 feet. Anything that you're seeing in yellow is essentially some form of non-leased space. So in the center would be a corridor that could get people up to the second floor in between a couple of shops. And at the far right between the new building and the existing co-op would be a service corridor that could be used by both. So that we could handle helping out with service and delivery both to the co-op and to the tenants that are part of the Tacoma Junction project. You will see that at the along Carroll Avenue, this element right here is a lay-by, which is the name for a lane that allows for truck delivery and pickup and service to happen off the current curb, but on the property in order to make deliveries to these tenants and to the co-op, pick up trash, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We've spoken about it before as well. The lay-by lane is something that we need to be able to make sure that we can handle the deliveries and service to the co-op, which has the demands of a very large tractor trailer, which can't turn around on the site, can't go down any of the side streets, and needs to basically deliver from the front of the building. It's currently delivering on the parking lot to the back of the building. So when this development happens, it will move out closer to the street. The reason that the building sort of jumps in a little bit and pulls back from the sidewalk is to give us a little bit more room for public space, outdoor seating, cafe seating, etc., and the ability to retain that visibility from Carroll Avenue. Each of these spaces are about just under or just over about 2,000 square feet. They could be, again, they could be combined for larger users, but they all have that presence right on Carroll Avenue. That's our front door. One level up above the street is, we're calling it office or event space. Typically, this would be a great floor for office users. We've just taken a cursory look at demising these spaces. This would be what it would look like for 4 different tenants, for instance, using that space. The core of the building, the yellow area, elevators and bathrooms are toward the back, where they're not as valuable and can actually be stacked above the other uses. But the other spaces in the blue get the opportunity to have windows basically on all of their sides, looking out toward the street.
Could you say what demising is?
Sorry, demising walls are separating walls between tenants in the building, so it's not an exterior wall. They're basically the walls that you see running vertically on this plan. I'll point to a couple of them. The demising walls basically run between the columns, and they can be moved. For instance, they're not the bearing walls. They can be moved so you can make a space smaller or larger. There is about, I don't think I mentioned it, sorry. In the retail floor, there's just under 15,000 gross square feet of lease space. Up above, there's almost 20,000 square feet available for office because we can stretch it all the way to the back of the building, which is a good size to have for a floor plate. And provides us with the opportunity to do multiple tenants. So we don't have to just have one big user to occupy that space. And then we have talked about the opportunity to get roof space, whether it's open, which you're seeing in the form of the green area, whether that is a green roof or occupiable event space. And then we've also dedicated the back half of the building away from the street as a potential third floor. So we have enough room in the height allowances to get that many floors in. It remains to be seen what we can use that space for. We think that it would be best used for event space. You could have parties there. People can rent the space out, or events, conferences, etc. So this is splitting the building about in half, about 9,500 square feet for each. And again, we pulled it back from the street so that it would occupy the back portion, and the front of the building would remain at about 2 stories. So we just took a quick massing of the property. This is as you're looking basically from the northeast back toward the site. The building on the left, this is the co-op as it exists, with its parking lot over here on the left-hand side, and Carroll Avenue's streetscape coming down and around the bend. The building back here in the background is the existing fire station. You see the sort of shed roof coming toward you between the Healy building and our property. We have one tall retail level, which is basically about the height of the co-op, a slightly shorter office level between, and then the occupiable space on top. We really see the opportunity here to create just a lot of vibrancy on the street. We have a lot of depth from the existing curb face back to where we're positioning the building. At its smallest point, which is over in the corner where the cars would enter the garage, it's at least 12 feet, and it widens out so that it's in line basically with the front of the brick part of the co-op. We do see the opportunity to create a little bit of a kind of a market feel, if you will. The architectural comments that came back to us talked about buildings that are built permanently. Brick was among the favorites of the building materials. We haven't made those decisions yet into moving into the architectural design, but we agree with those kinds of concepts. This is a building that we see as needing to be timeless, needing to be of this place, and needing to be respectful of the buildings that surround it. Let's see. And just again for a little bit of reference, the existing TPSS co-op on the left-hand side, the lay-by lane is shown about here. This is during the time when the truck's not here, shown in this image. The ground floor is entirely retail. That little punch through that gets you to the office floor would be right through the middle of the space here. These spaces could be easily kind of cordoned off with planters and things like is the norm for outdoor cafe space. We like the idea of a nice tall canopy, simple, but could have the signage mounted on the front so that the visibility aspect is still there for the tenants. The floor of office kind of sandwiched in here through the top, a little bit of outdoor space there for a couple of the office users. And then again, the back half of the building potentially occupiable and leasable, and the front half, people could be up there having an event or attending a garden. There are really a lot of opportunities for that upper floor space. So again, not intended to be the architectural style, but just intended to sort of show how these spaces start to define themselves in 3 dimensions and how they can fit in with the existing architecture and buildings. So where we are going, as we mentioned, we're looking for the approval by you all of this concept plan. The next steps are to file the preliminary plans. Basically, we have, with a little bit more detail, the combined preliminary and site plan, a subdivision plan. This is a sort of, I call it kind of a dual tracking process because we're working with the city. We also have to have some things reviewed by the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And we look forward to, as soon as May 2019, breaking ground and building what we think would be a great contributing asset to the city. And again, we know that this is not the first or the last time you'll see us, and that we'll be able to work together with you and with the rest of the community. The council review of the combined site plan, the Montgomery County site plan review process has public input. and then we'll be before the planning board. The facade advisory board is going to help us understand how to make sure this is a building that works in Tacoma Park. And the Historic Preservation Commission is going to keep an eye on how we're managing all of those threads to make sure that we're a building that maybe in the future other buildings will be judged against whether they're doing their part to be in keeping with what we've provided. So with that, we'll take questions and ask for your comments.
Councilmember Siemens, you're ready to ask a question?
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. And I just had one question. Back on the ground floor view, and I wasn't reading the text while you were doing this, but I noticed there were different colors for what appears to be the sidewalk and terrace area. There's a grayish color and a pinkish color. What's the difference between those?
So what we've shown out here, starting from the curb and coming back to the building, there's about 6 to 7 feet of what we are kind of calling the planting area. It's the traditional space between the curb and the walking sidewalk that we could either do as fully green or as something that has trees and grates so that there's more active sidewalk. Both of those examples exist in Tacoma Park. We'd like to sort of figure out what the right answer is for this project. Then moving backward from this point right here to the face of the building, as it goes even inboard another 10 feet, is paved. And we see that as being paved because it's easy to walk on, it's easy to set tables on, et cetera, nice and level. There will be opportunities for planters or even spaces that we could do plantings right into soil through that area. The other things that you're seeing in the image are the little square shapes are meant to be tables and chairs, maybe even with umbrellas, so that there's some signal that there's activity there. The rectangular shapes are things that usually are planter boxes that delineate between where the public can walk and where people might be enjoying a meal. So there's a little bit of definition there.
On my screen, I see a difference in color between the gray area, like in the middle there, and that little pink area there.
Right in through here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
Go to your right.
Sorry. Okay. So again, what we're looking at is this. Maybe this will help. This light blue area that's kind of overlaid on the top is as if you're looking through a glass canopy.
Okay.
Yeah. That didn't work as well as I thought it was going to work.
Oh, it works great. It's just it needs some explanation along the way.
Gotcha. So what we had been challenged when we were talking about the lay-by lane to figure out if there was a way to actually keep the deliveries undercover in a way, and also to provide outdoor space for diners and seating that could be covered but still out of the weather. So that's what that line is that goes through there.
Very good. And and my question really had to do with the lay-by because the trucks come during the day, not necessarily when they're, they come during the day when there are going to be customers theoretically at the restaurant if there's one there. And so the question is there enough room for, small forklifts to be carrying things in without running over pedestrians?
So that is the challenge of how to manage that process. One of the things that we're doing is we do like the idea that we can actually delineate this line right here, which is the back of the lay-by lane, would have bollards in it to make sure there's a very clear separation between the truck and the sidewalk. And that would basically be the limit of any area we want people to be in at any time, whether or not there is a truck there. There's plenty of room between this space. This canopy right here is drawn at about 20 feet. So there's plenty of room to actually maneuver around even when there are pedestrians in that area if you're hand trucking or carrying it in. We expect that this lay-by lane will be used not only by the large semi-trailer, but other trucks as well. And most of the other deliveries will actually be done with the smaller vehicles. So again, it's a good point because that is the part of the challenge that we have to solve. The way that they've done it on 14th Street with the Trader Joe's is They usually have someone out there at the time that they're loading things, kind of with flags, they get the things off the truck, back on the truck real quickly, and then move along. So
Okay,
that
okay, so you got the lay-by there, and let's
Mhm.
say you have a big semi pulled in there. They're going to be, if it's a big truck like that, they're probably going to be using a power forklift off the back of the truck. And so then they'll have to get past the ballards up onto the sidewalk.
the bollards basically stop at the horizontal edge, so they would be coming off the back of the truck right through
Okay.
here.
Not across our flowers, I know that, in the grass. But,
Correct.
And then they'd progress on down the sidewalk and to the little alley.
To this location here, yeah.
Okay, and then you're envisioning that the co-op would have a entrance on the side there in the front?
That's one of the options that we see as an opportunity to connect in the yellow zone where they're currently getting.
No, they're currently getting it back, towards the rear of the building. Back there, yeah.
Yep. And that's what we'd have to work that out. But this was the closest location we could get the lay-by lane, given the signal mast and some of the other things that are happening from the intersection standpoint. We had talked about moving it up or moving it back, and this ended up being the best location from a traffic safety movement and signalization standpoint from the road section. So we're making sure that we can get things as close to the co-op as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Schultz?
The lay-by is what, long enough to accommodate a big semi.
Yes.
And therefore, it means that you could probably park 2 box trucks there simultaneously for other kinds of deliveries. In a previous concept plan, before you knew you were going to be able to acquire the auto clinic, you had shown at the other end of as I'm looking at it, would be on the left-hand side of this picture, an access point for trucks to come up inside and then get to the back of some stores. But that's not part of this plan.
Correct. That having the trucks either head in or back in from the left-hand side became an issue with the nature of Carroll Avenue and having to cross the double yellow line in order to either come backward or forward, and that was a non-starter with State Highway.
Yeah, I no doubt, but that would even be the case for like small delivery trucks.
Most trucks ended up hitting that double yellow line, having to maneuver into that part of the site.
You're going to have 72 spaces underground. That's a lot of spaces, and I don't doubt that they're going to be needed because you're going to be generating with that amount of square footage. I guess you said about 15,000 square feet of retail, depending on the types of businesses that are there. Obviously, a restaurant or 2 is going to generate a lot more employees. Some of those employees will be coming by vehicle and needing to park under there. My concern is that while it's great to have that many spaces, how do they, and they're going to be coming in and out of that ramp, how wide is that ramp? Is that going to be able to accommodate more than one line of cars
Right
going
now,
in and one line of cars coming out?
Right now, the way that we have it drawn, it's 1 lane out, 1 lane in. So we have it at 25 feet.
Yeah, that concerns me because you could get people. I'm wondering and worrying about people back trying to get out of the place, not in any kind of rush, but just simply when you got 72 places and a restaurant's closing and everybody's leaving at once or something like that, or you've got people wanting to get in. They're going to get into each other's way. I'd really like to learn more about that aspect of this, what we're looking at here. Because if it doesn't work really well, and there's some flexibility, like a car gets stalled in one of the lanes, gosh, well, that would be a nightmare. Changing to the subject, we know, having just talked about bicycles here tonight, that this intersection happens to be one of the most difficult in the community for bicyclists to get through because of the peculiar volume of traffic and all the turning movements, and there really isn't any bike lane there now. Is there any room there in this concept to provide a painted bike lane that would be separate from the car movement in front of the curb on this thing?
Right now, there's not the curb width to do that, just in the given space in terms of the standards of the bike lanes. However, it is a comment that MNC PPC has also brought up to us, and we want to work together with them. Now that we may have bicycles on the sidewalk, we definitely want to encourage the safe passage of bicycles to this site and through this site, and we're being tasked from the county to make sure that we're looking at that very carefully. So we're actually working with their specialists to understand what the options are to make it the best that it can be.
Yeah,
we're going to have very little success in moving that curb, but we want to figure out what the best way to accommodate people through that section
Sure.
is.
I just would point out that this is a heavily used intersection by bicyclists, because if you're commuting anywhere in Tacoma Park, it almost seems like at some point you hit through this intersection. So it needs, whether it's at the surface of the cartway for vehicles, or whether it's somehow or another separated by something or raised or something. We certainly don't want bicycles on the sidewalk in this area, because that would create a lot of confusion.
We actually see it as an advantage that there are so many bicycles through this area. We want to figure out how to capture that energy, and also working out how the bike share element of that's currently there can be an asset to all of the parties working in that area. So it's a good point, and it's something that we're going to absolutely have to be working with all of the agencies on to solve.
Lastly, this image we're looking at right now, I think it's intriguing, but I think all of us would like to see a much bigger blow up of that as you are in a better and better position to refine your thinking about the design there, because this is hard to read.
Yep.
And I mean, to realize that you may not be ready to move to that next level of detail, but when you are, we need to have a bigger image of that space.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Qureshi?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks a lot for that presentation. Good to see you all here. I guess I have a few questions. First, sort of related to what we talked about, which the city manager went through, which is the community consultation process, which happened in the spring, and sort of your efforts at incorporating some aspects of that. So obviously we weren't in your boardroom when you guys had your initial concept, and we're looking at the first concept now, but can you give some concrete examples of things that you took from those community consultation meetings and implemented in this concept?
Sure. One of the things that we talked about internally, and that's reflected here, is how can we really incorporate better public space that isn't necessarily a formal park or a playground or something that's so identifiable as public space. And so we took a closer look at areas of not only Tacoma Park, but other places that don't always have such a grand sort of street experience, and figure out what those elements are that can be incorporated into a streetscape that still has to perform the function of successful retail, of getting people from one end to the other that may not even be shoppers. So we've looked at ways that we can incorporate street trees, plant strips, not only just to submit a greener plan, but something that could be used as a low-impact design standard if there are ways to collect stormwater. Any of these spaces, and I go back to Mr. Schultz's comment, as this develops and grows into more of a real drawing, these things like these outdoor seating areas, but areas that are not just for the public consumption of private things, but benches that are there for people that are just sitting walking along in the community and can take a pause and sit. That's why we pulled the building back a little bit, which is a little bit against some of the rules of retail, wanting to be right up at the street and have that visibility right indoors. But how can we best benefit both our own tenants and the people occupying the street by sharing that space? I think that was one of the most sort of tangible things that we took to heart, instead of just making a strip of buildings right across the front of Carroll Avenue. The other was, how can we manage that idea of outdoor space somewhere else in the building that may not be accessible immediately by the public, but that was sort of open for people to use. And that's really the concept of, how can we make this open space on the rooftop be something that is useful to the community, whether it's space that you can have an event there or a community event of some sort, but how can it also address being a little bit above the street but still part of it? And then I think that we got a lot of questions and concerns and hope for the tenant strategy, which is early yet, but we remain really focused on the idea that this is a neighborhood project, and how can we best serve the community by the elements of these slots that are kind of the right sizes for smaller tenants, for more locals, for people to occupy, that could actually be something that becomes a contributing part of living in this community, not just be on the map and people are coming from all over the place. How can we make it local? And that's why we're sort of choosing these sort of narrow, potentially combinable tenant spaces that can really address some of the concerns and the hopes of the community going forward.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Schultz raised this point effectively, and I think you've been at previous meetings or have been privy to them to know that, and even in this meeting, which is something that I raised several weeks ago that now we've been talking about, is that this intersection has its issues. And Councilmember Schultz brought up bicyclists, but whether you're a pedestrian, a bicyclist, or somebody in a vehicle, it's a problem, and it can be a problem, which is something you're going to have to contend with moving forward. And one example that you gave about having a tractor trailer crossing against two yellow lines, the issue that raises with State Highway, and I think some of the members of the co-op, before I think State Highway even told you that, were here telling us that. So I appreciate that you recognize that. Do you have comparative examples of developments that you've been involved in or you've done research in this type of process for, where you've dealt with complex intersections like this? And can you give us some examples of how that process works? Because, there's people here in the community who might be here for the co-op, but they also live on Sycamore or Poplar.
Right.
And, when you talk about an event space up top that you could have a party at, I mean, they're rightfully, forget the moment that I'm here for the co-op. I'm here right now as somebody who lives down in that valley that's going to hear that party. So, there's a lot of people are coming from various angles, and understandably so.
Sure.
So if you can speak a little bit to that, about how you, in your experience, navigate a complex intersection, a local tenant that people care deeply about, and the fact that you're in a residential neighborhood.
All of the above, sometimes separately, sometimes all together. One thing I do want to mention is that I think that one of the successes of this neighborhood structure, in terms of its intersection connectivity and its crazy angles and everything else that's going on, is when Dee and I first met, actually, I referred to it as perhaps the safest intersection. It's confusing, and sometimes that makes it difficult for anybody to do anything really crazy. One thing that this intersection does have going for it right now is that the light timing is structured so that all the lights are red at the same time.
Well, not right now.
Not right now.
You don't want to talk about the light
I would
timing
not.
right
Just,
now.
I would stay away from that.
Okay. All right.
Touchy subject.
Let's talk about the
Just
structure.
not do that.
No, there are things that help keep people sort of moving in a slow fashion. We worked on a project in Stuart, Florida, where there were 7 intersections coming together, and the result was an oblong sort of half roundabout and then a slip road and something else. And the traffic was tamed, but at the risk of all the things kind of going on around it. And I want to help make sure that we look at this through all of those different lenses, it's a great way to look at the project. It's not just about getting the traffic, from this point to this point, or about how big this building is going to be. How does it meet with its neighbors? How do people actually feel welcome here? How can you do more than one thing on this site? We see an advantage to how this site has lots of opportunities of visibility from the different angles. So there's an advantage on our part from seeing this from sort of 5 different aspects, not just one passing by. We think that actually helps to kind of slow people down and take a little bit of pause. On the other hand, we also know that it's a very narrow roadway. We think that if we can get the truck lay-by, for instance, out of the existing right-of-way and onto our property and give that land back as right-of-way to that activity, it would help make sure that there's not a miscommunication about how things are supposed to behave. We also want to make sure that in any of these opportunities, and it's why we're working with traffic engineers and others and meeting with the representatives from those different agencies, is it's important to make sure that things, if they're not completely intuitive, we're very clear about where we intend people to be. So we don't want to give mixed messages about whether it's okay to sort of go down this road when we don't want people there. We want people to stay away from where the traffic is moving fastest. We want to make sure it's very clear how you can walk around this lay-by area. We're going to work very hard on understanding how we can make sure that it's clear to all of the parties how those are supposed to be used. From the use mix standpoint, we absolutely want to know what's going to be beneficial to the community and what's not. We think that the ground floor being retail and being mostly locals and having some food or beverage or shop, things that are not available currently today in this part of the city, would be beneficial to the community. The floor above, from an office space standpoint, there are users that just need a little bit of space, not a lot. They want to be in the neighborhood and walk to work, or bike to work. The upper floor is still in flux in terms of what it would be best suited for. We like the idea of the advantage that the site has from a height standpoint, but it comes with the issues of, well, how does that feel to the rest of the neighborhood around? So we are absolutely all ears about understanding how that's going to be best suited.
Thanks. And, I think you have experience, and I've researched each of you before I met each of you, so I know who you are before you come in here. But there's a lot of concern about, well, this is already a bad intersection, it's going to get worse. My understanding also is that you're not going to build a development that's going to create such a traffic jam in front that people aren't going to come to it. So I think you have a vested interest in ensuring that as this process moves forward, you work closely with State Highway and in your traffic study and thoroughly study this issue to ensure that not only is that development site attractive because you can get there, but that also it doesn't make things worse. I guess the other question that I have, and this is my last point for now, is, I was disappointed, as were others on the council, that, and this might be a question for Dee, but that things did not work out with the co-op. And you all now have this 4,200 square feet of retail space for what I presume is going to be your anchor tenant. How are you moving along in that process without necessarily divulging to us what's there? But and have you had additional contacts with the co-op?
So regarding the future of that anchor tenant space, as Colin mentioned, the space can be demised in many different ways, and so what we're showing is the anchor tenant right now could potentially expand. It could move to a different area of the building. It is very early for us to start talking to tenants. I mean, we've had some initial conversations with folks, but the typical retail tenant isn't really willing to even consider a letter of intent until they actually see a shovel in the ground. Now, with regard to the co-op, we have had a couple conversations, not me personally, but our CEO, Adrian, has talked to the co-op a couple times over the last several months. My understanding is where things are right now is that, should the co-op want to be a part of this project, we're still open to it, but the train is moving pretty quickly, as you can see. Once the plan is approved by council, if and when it is approved by council, we're going to move very quickly towards filing of the preliminary and combined site plan, and that is there's a lot of investment in that, and I think at that point we really need to know what the building's going to look like. The co-op would certainly be a great addition to the building. We're still fully open to working with them if they're able to get on board.
That's all I have, and this is not directed at you, Dee, but this is my last opportunity to talk about this issue, at least for now, and that is to say, there's a lot of people here who support the co-op. There's a lot of people here who are board members of the co-op. I would urge board members to explore every opportunity and not perceive the fact that this council has authorized, pursuant to the development agreement, NDC to seek another anchor tenant. Go in there and be attractive and try to get back at the table. I understand there's new leadership at the co-op with probably a different outlook on things. A new, fresh outlook can be helpful. So I'd ask that you do that, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith?
And really quickly, I just want
Okay.
to correct something that Colin said earlier. He said that we had acquired the auto clinic. We have the auto clinic under contract, and so we haven't actually closed on it yet. So I did want to correct that.
Thank you guys for coming. It's always good to see you. A couple questions. On the retail floor, will there be storage available for the retail tenants that they can lease, make part of their lease for in these spaces, or are they going to have to just be constrained with what's available?
The good news is that we have extra depth in terms of what a normal sort of retail bay would be, and by that I mean that the extent of what we're showing on the other floors is this line at the bottom, and so essentially anything along the back here could be useful to a tenant as storage space. It's space that's at the back. It's essentially darker space, and it does have the ability to be on the path of the delivery corridor. So the short answer is yes. It remains to be seen how tenants will react to paying for extra space to store things. But that's exactly what we would use that space for. It's really the best thing for it. These spaces are at about their maximum depth from a retail floor area standpoint. So that's really what all of this stuff around the back could be used for. We haven't included it in the count for these spaces, but that's the amount of raw space that's back there for that kind of use.
And the two in-cap spaces, are they being built as potential restaurants?
We haven't made any commitments to which spaces would be a true restaurant or another shop at this point.
And on my left-hand side, the 2,500 square foot bay,
Mm-hmm.
if you guys eliminated that, would that have a dire impact on your ROI?
You're talking about the last space over on the left.
When you say eliminate, do you mean
so that we could
completely
accommodate
vertically the entire building?
Yeah, so we could accommodate Councilmember Schultz's issue with getting multiple cars into and out of the garage.
I think it would have I'd have to run the numbers, but just what I know about pro formas, I think it would reduce income, and I think costs would not reduce on a 1-to-1 ratio. So I think it would have a negative impact on the pro forma. I also don't, if you look at DC USA as a comparative project, all retail in DC, 3 floors, a lot larger. 3 floors of parking below grade, I think close to 400 spaces, and they have 1 lane in, 1 lane out, and it works just fine.
What about the 3rd floor space that you guys are proposing, would that be managed by NDC or NDC's entities, or would you ask someone else to take that?
So we do not typically manage properties ourselves. We typically third party. This is a unique project, so we're not sure yet. When we first met with Edens, who developed Union Market about a year ago, actually, to learn more about how they manage Union Market, their advice was that we should remain flexible at this stage, and that once we know who the tenants are and how the building's going to operate, we should think about either potentially hiring staff to do that ourselves if it turns out to be such a unique building that we can't find a manager, frankly. We did talk to Edens about whether or not they would be interested in managing it. I think it's a little too small for them, unfortunately. But if we were to manage the building, we would manage that third floor as well.
Okay. And what about the co-working office space? This is kind of like a WeWork concept, right?
Well, it's smaller than a WeWork. A WeWork is, WeWork tends to want to be like 30 to 50,000 square feet.
But you're going to ask people to pay for a desk.
Well, I don't think we're there yet, to be quite honest. But it could be a single tenant space. It could be shared workspace. We've certainly looked at both. But we're not there yet, to be quite frank. If we found a tenant that was completely committed to taking a separate space, I think we'd be very open to that, because co-working spaces also are very difficult to manage.
Right. And can you talk about the Ability Project?
Yes. So the Ability Project has dropped out. It's recent news about a month ago, a little over a month ago. They reached out to our CEO and let us know that their board decided to go in a different direction. And it sounds like there were two different perspectives on the board, and there was a group on the board that was very excited about this project, and there was another group on the board that wanted to go to a different project that was, my understanding is that they wanted to go to a location that was already built or under construction. I'm not sure the details, but something that was a little more shorter term. So they're no longer involved.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Councilmember Kohler?
Thank you. A couple of observations and then some questions. One of the things that you mentioned, I think, was that you set the proposed building back further from the street than you might have, but it looks like it's even with the front of the co-op. So in terms of the overall facade, that matches up, right?
It does through the two tenants on the left-hand side
Right.
and the main tenant. Yes,
Right.
correct.
And another thing that I noticed when at one of those consultation meetings, there was a whole series of photographs of various other developments, none of which you were literally proposing we should do, but people put up all the stickers around which they liked and which they didn't. And when I first looked at it, it was very hard to see what sort of consistent theme ran through. But when I looked at it for a long time, what I saw was that what people really wanted was an open front, either with glass or windows that could be open. So I think that part captured that. A couple of questions then. So on the other screen that shows the schematic drawing, let's see, not that one, but the next, well, not that one either. That one, yeah. So it says in the second paragraph, lay-by lanes shown in same position as previous schemes could alternatively be located as in scheme 6A closer to co-op. Can you elaborate on that?
We did. We had, when we were talking with primarily the traffic consultants and State Highway, we were looking at different places where this lay-by could essentially sort of pick up and move from one end of Carroll to the other across our property. And there had actually been an idea that right about where you see that tree on the right-hand side and where the lay-by lane stops is essentially kind of where the mast is, the arm for the signal. So we were either bookended by putting it in front of that, which you're seeing here, or even past it, closer to the corner of Sycamore. And we had just drawn that so that we could get some input from the State Highway and from our traffic consultant. At the end of the day, it created a whole number of issues with how you get into the co-op, and it would put the truck closer to the co-op building, but everything else about it made other problems show up
Yep.
that weren't part of it. So that's what that's referencing. That was pretty easy to drop out because it didn't help the
And that would have had to go on to that's the other property too,
Correct.
right? So okay.
Correct.
So with the color scheme there, you've got the pink and the brown. The back sort of yellow or mustard colored. So is that accessible when you walk down that middle pathway, or is that
when you walk
just
down
for the trash and so on?
It's really back of house. It's true back of house. When you
Okay.
walk down this corridor, you basically end up at the elevator bank and stairwell.
Okay.
So there could be a door there to get into that space, but that's basically for people who are coming in to go upstairs.
Okay, but that door wouldn't be public, right?
No.
That would, and so that point, or if you went down the passageway between the co-op and the larger place, larger store on the right, those are the sort of the two only access points to that rear area, unless each store has its own back door or whatever, I guess, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
each of the stores would effectively have a door that opens out into the corridor.
So on the entrance into the parking lot where you show the arrows, now that dips down underground, right? So is there a flat space there that
It's flat. Sorry. Basically, when you're turning off Carroll Avenue, it's flat to here, and then you drop.
right, but so I guess, but is there, once you drop, is there a roof
Yes.
over that? And so there's the flat area you can stand
No,
on?
in this version, it's actually just open.
Oh.
So it's open. You drive down. There's another flat landing, and then drop again to get the head height.
Did you contemplate like having a plaza above it or something like that?
You have to build it at the second floor because you have to get under it.
I see. Okay.
It would be basically it would be the office level that we're referring to that could extend out over
Okay.
that, but you'd have to build a
But it
wall.
wouldn't
on
be
either side.
accessible to the public off of the front, right?
Correct.
So on the top, typically you have, air compressors and other kinds of things like that and roof equipment. So is that going to extend kind of another level above that? Is that likely to be a noisy kind of bunch of equipment? What's your sense about that?
Those are all really good questions. Right now, we were thinking that they wouldn't have to go roof mounted above that. They could basically be back of house along this area on the back of the building. There would be typically there's in the little sketch that we did, we're just showing this little spot where the elevator
Right,
core is
right,
located, whether or not that needs an overrun depending on the type of elevator that it is. But we're trying to keep that to about the same height as essentially as the fire station that you see to the back and the right, just with a flat
Okay.
roof.
And if you wouldn't mind just going back again to the schematic, I just have a couple more questions. Not that one, but the other one, sorry. Yeah, that. So let's say the co-op found a way to come back into the process. Then more or less the 4,200 square foot piece might be where they would go, but then you would have to redesign this to some extent because that passageway would no longer be relevant, or what do you think? I mean, what could happen?
We'd have to work that out. We would imagine that the best space for the co-op to take would be the one directly
Right.
adjacent.
Right.
In which case, we could move an element of that storage door, if you will, over. The nice thing about that idea is that if this entire frontage is one tenant, all the way from the existing co-op and across, it's not typically common for all of that to be glass. There might be an opportunity to not have to have a separate corridor, if you will. We'd continue to have to talk about, like we were several months ago, talking about how to share those kinds of spaces among the different users. So a bit of redesign. This one I think was 6C. I think that might have been 4J. But we've been thinking about those kinds of things all along.
But even with this drawing, and it would depend on what the co-op wanted to do and whether they would want to have a delivery door closer to the front, but in theory, the delivery point could be, if it made sense to the co-op, anywhere along that passageway. so that the distance was shorter, I suppose, right? I mean, is that?
If I'm following, I
Yeah,
think so.
okay.
Yes.
And then, so just the last question I had, and I know it's probably too soon, but I think you talked and Adrian talked previously about having, food purveyors in these various places. Is that something that you would want all of these shops to be, or some, and then others with actual shops that people would purchase retail items? I know you don't know, but what's the kind of sense for what makes logical sense? What makes street sense in this case?
We have talked about what the right mix is, and that's part of what we do as our sort of retail
Right.
strategy. What's the right mix? We don't see it as all restaurants. We don't see it as all shops. The mix would be the sweet spot, if you will, for what we've been looking at so far is in that sort of food and beverage game, but that can take a variety of different sort of modes and users. I think that, again, it's going to be an important sort of discovery of who's out there, who's doing something interesting and neat, who can be in this place and thrive, and who's going to benefit from the availability of the customers that are nearby, people that are coming to this site. And there are some of those relationships that happen very naturally when you have a type of restaurant works well with a certain type of other purveyor. People like to double up trips or make one trip to get more than one thing. So it is early to tell, but we want to make sure that it is a balance of kind of the right things. We're seeing a predominance toward the food and beverage, but that doesn't mean that we're not looking for other sources as well.
And very last question, I meant to ask before. So potentially you have a large vehicle parked there, maybe for a substantial amount of time. It's often going to be refrigeration vehicles. They tend to kind of continue running while they're there. Any sort of conflict that you would see between that and having, an outdoor kind of seating set up?
I think, the outdoor cafe scene is rarely sort of completely quiet,
Right.
but we have worked with that in Bethesda Row and other places where there's not always the sort of truck that always disappears from view. So there will be those kinds of things to contend with. It's part of that sort of street life. On the other hand, I think one of the other comments that the county is also bringing to our attention is, how does that whole lay-by-lane get kind of regulated? That's a big question of how long is a truck supposed to be there? What times of day? We've pointed out that what we've learned through this process is that some of those things we can manage, and some of those things are the way that, for instance, the co-op gets its deliveries. So that's not going to change.
Control that.
So we need to be aware of how those things work and what time of day this is all going to take place.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Just maybe to keep on this whole theme of the lay-by. So walk me through, if you're getting deliveries and you're the one all the way on the left, they would come in through the lay-by, come down the corridor here and go all the way to the back?
So there's a couple of different things going on in this diagram and in this project, right? I think we also have to remember that it's not all of these users, probably not any of the users in the red and pink will get a substantial number of deliveries from a tractor trailer. Most of these types of tenants use smaller vehicles. And so some of these, it will not be uncommon at all for someone to pull up in the lay-by lane in a small truck and make a delivery through the front door, which happens in a lot of urban conditions. The access for things like trash, though, and porting things to a centralized location over to the side would happen through that. And that's usually something that tenants are comfortable with. They know that they do those things at regular routine intervals through their employees, take trash out to a facility. That's actually, the word trash is written back here. If there's a centralized location that if they're food and beverage, they may have refrigerated trash, et cetera, but a kind of a common space there. Not unlike having to go out to the parking lot and throw the things into the dumpster. It would be rare that you would actually get your delivery all the way through that corridor and to the back in our minds and for who we're kind of looking at. Taking things out is the opposite story. They would definitely bring things through the back into a central facility and then out when the pickup times are.
Oh, can you go down to like where you have the parking spaces? So you have an elevator over here, and I don't know if it's too soon to ask this question or if the co-op would want that, but could you do another elevator closer to the co-op to make it easier for people who were bringing their groceries up and down? Kind of like
that little yellow square is kind of a floater.
Okay.
It's moved around a number of times through the process where we've had it kind of be a central feature where it lands right on the sidewalk, to moving it to a corner that just gets you to one level and then you're on your own. In this particular scheme, since we're working through the building with the other floors, this is a nice place to have it for the other tenants. We could certainly look at, from a design standpoint, it's not hard to place these things. From a budget standpoint and a constructability standpoint, we'd have to work it out. Right now, the way that we've got the upper floor situated, there's not a particularly convenient place to locate it, but it could easily be tucked in the corner of a lease space, for instance. But again, we'd be fighting how much sort of street frontage we can give to a particular tenant. But that's what they do, for instance, at the Chevy Chase Pavilion when you come up next to the Maggiano's, there's
Right.
a little spot like that.
Mhm.
It's done quite a bit.
Cool. And looking at the third floor again, how much, and maybe this might be a question for Dee, in terms of the financial feasibility of the project, doing that third floor in the back?
So you're asking how important is the
Yeah.
third floor? We've run it both ways. I mean,
Mhm.
we can make it work both ways. I mean, it certainly helps to have more square footage. You spread your costs over, we think of things in terms of dollars per square foot a lot of times, especially from a cost perspective. And so you're able to spread things like your parking garage over more rentable square footage. You're able to spread some of your facade costs, for instance, over more square footage. So it reduces the cost per square foot and makes the project more financially feasible. But we've run it both ways, and we can make it work both ways. We like the idea of this from a design perspective because it does create a usable rooftop. It allows people to enjoy, the public realm. Semi-public realm, I guess it's in private space, but we spent a lot of time in this process thinking about open space and how the community will interact with the building. So we liked it from that perspective as well. But again, we can, certainly make it work without it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think, and as many people know here in the community, we need more meeting spaces and gathering spaces. I guess one of my concerns is for the neighborhood there. Would there have to be sort of like an AC unit on top of that building there? And we're already, some issues already with sort of the fire station and other noise. And so just thinking in those terms.
Yep, and we certainly have dealt with issues similar to that in the past, and there's screening methods and sound attenuation methods that can totally block the sound out. One of the benefits of facing the open space toward the street and not having it faced towards the residential neighborhood is that structure does block the sound to a certain extent. But I hear you about the AC units on the roof. And certainly, through operations, we can limit the hours and things of that nature. We certainly wouldn't have parties going here until midnight. We're not building a nightclub. So I would imagine that the hours will be very reasonable, and we'd be very sensitive to neighbor concerns.
Okay. And then, just because residents like to text me as we're sitting in the meeting, I'll ask you a question somebody asked me, which is what are the parking requirements? Are you meeting all those parking requirements for the amount of retail and other things that you have here?
There are always two answers to that, and right now, just for sake of ratio quoting, we're just under about 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of retail. And at this point in time, we would be looking for opportunities to make sure that people can get here in a multitude of ways. We would love to have more parking. We don't think parking is a great use of the space, but it also needs to be beneficial for the tenants and the users of the space and be easy and convenient to get to. It's a little parking challenged right now in terms of what would be seen if you had a great surface parking lot and the building behind it. We also think that this isn't that kind of site. And we would hope that if we could balance things like neighborhood uses, that we could balance things like success of the street frontage, that we would see that we wouldn't need that demand that sometimes gets placed on projects like this. We, as a team, are comfortable with the numbers, the way that they're working out, but we'd have to work with all of the jurisdictions in making sure that we're delivering on what's going to be required of us. But from a tenant and use standpoint, we're not upset with the number that we've got, and we're trying to make sure that we deliver as much quality space as we can with that number.
And do you think, and you may not be able to answer this question now, with the number of spaces you have, would you be able to have spaces for the co-op to rent?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we have to continue. We'd be excited to do that. Yeah.
Okay. And figure out that.
Yep.
Did you want to say something?
I'd like to speak at some point.
Oh, okay. I think the only other thing I was going to mention on the shared workspace is that we had a new share workspace open in Old Town called Taco Work that just opened a couple of weeks ago, and it's been hugely successful. So as you're looking at those things, you may want to connect with those folks. I think they've completely rented out their spaces, and it's a really nice location. And also just thinking about some of this space and the number of nonprofits that are in the area. I think many of us are saddened to hear that the Ability Project would not be part of this, but there are a lot of other nonprofits in the area always looking for space. So it would be great to figure out how to maybe get some of those located here as well.
Sure.
All right. I think, Councilmember Siemens, did you have another?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
You got me to thinking.
Okay.
In talking about the parking spaces there, I think that back when we first started talking about this project, we recognized the use of that lot by not just the co-op, but other businesses in the area. And it sounds like right now that would not be accommodated with the parking you're talking about.
For additional spaces that are.
Are you saying? Are you
I'm saying there are businesses
Okay.
across the street that currently use that the city parking lot.
Yep.
And we had told people that we would certainly consider the needs of those businesses too as we looked at the parking for this project.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering whether we are looking at that or it's
So I think we'd be open to renting those spaces to anyone who wanted to use them. I think we would, in our traffic study when we get to that point, which is hopefully very soon, we're going to consider the loads generated from all the retail along Carroll. We're literally going to go and talk to those business owners and ask them what are their peak hours, what are their low hours, what are their hours in which they're closed, things of that nature, to determine whether or not we do have enough parking to accommodate them, but certainly would consider renting spaces to them as well. I mean, the benefit, I think, to what we're proposing, which is really shared parking between retail and office, is that office tends to get used during the day. A lot of the folks who will be using it as office will be in the neighborhood, in and around the neighborhood.
Right.
And during the evenings would be the peak hours, and that's typically when offices are closed. And so it wouldn't be I don't anticipate this is going to be a fully, occupied parking garage during the day, which is when a lot of those businesses are in operation.
Your answer to the mayor was, I think, less specific than what I was expecting, because I think typically park and planning talks about number of required spaces per square foot of business.
So you're asking from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah.
So from a regulatory perspective, we are below what is required, but our zoning attorney has advised us through the in park and planning, and the DRC confirmed that through the process that we're going through, the combined site plan, preliminary plan, site plan process, parking waivers are granted all the time, and this is not not asking for a massive parking waiver or anything to that effect. But we still need to do some of those calculations, to be quite frank. But we're not there. I can't quote what how many spaces short we are. But we're not fully compliant with the letter of the law, but through the combined site plan process, which gives all the agencies purview over approving the project. They have, and we put this in one of the slides, they're supportive of the approach that we've taken to parking. We presented them 2 plans, one of which we didn't go through today because they were not supportive of the parking approach, which was significantly less parking. It was somewhat surface parked in the back, and they like this plan a lot more.
Okay.
And we're
Thank
happy
you.
to share those comments with you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Schultz?
Can I just ask one detailed
Yeah.
follow-up before? The mayor asked before about the showing whether it worked or not with and without the third story. If the third story is not part of it, or the 9,500 square feet, does that change the parking ratio?
Yes,
Okay.
it would. Yeah.
So that would potentially put you back within the...
No.
Okay, just closer.
It still would not be within the, yes, exactly.
Councilmember Schultz?
I have just a bunch of questions that I'm just going to ask in no particular order. First of all, I just want to make a comment, and I think that perhaps the most exciting thing to me about this project is that I see so much flexibility in this floor plan, particularly the ground level floor plan, of how this, because you got that back space that you're not using, that you can push these retail spaces frontwards and backwards a little bit. It looks like you can accommodate the co-op if it turns out that you can do that, or if the parties want to do that. And the demising walls can be moved. So it's, what we're seeing here, I can see that what we might see 2 months from now might look a little different, which would be a good thing. But having said that, I just, with regard to the front of the co-op, you're going to have this big canopy running all the way across the front of the building that you're building. But is there any kind of thought about trying to see if that extended roof could be carried out to the front of the co-op so as to unite that co-op's facade with the facade of the rest of the project? I'm not saying that that's necessarily what the co-op would want, but I'm just looking for flexibility.
There's not a physical reason why it couldn't happen?
Yeah, just to help it look like it actually is connected and not just something stuck on the end. You were talking earlier about the green space and wanting to unite the upper levels and make it all kind of flow, but it occurs to me that in order to get to the second level, where the offices are purported to be, is that somebody's going to have to come in off the street or go into that parking garage and get on an elevator. But if they come in off the street, they have to walk all the way in the length of that corridor and then go up the elevator and then come back and find the offices that they want. And I'm wondering, why don't you think about putting out an exterior staircase on the front of the whole project so that somebody could literally just come in off the street, walk up the staircases. Obviously, it wouldn't work for disabled people, but everybody else. And then it would help kind of unify so that the trek to get to the second level wouldn't seem like such that you were going into the very back of this whole project in order to get to those businesses.
And I would say that we want to try as hard as we can. This project tends to be, if not is, sort of retail-driven ground floor plane.
Yeah.
So the office is a secondary user. So we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that we make the best environment for the retail tenants.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point because I think there are places where you could. Sorry, I went the wrong way.
Sorry.
Where are we going?
I'll tell you where we're going. We had looked at places and to the point about where the elevator could be located.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that was up against that street front, to us with a limited amount of frontage to show, was was working against us in terms of the retail.
I would just point to the on Ellsworth Drive.
Yep.
In the middle of Silver Spring where that water fountain is that you've got a staircase that goes up that accesses those uses on the second level.
Yeah.
So the other, I'll just keep moving forward.
Okay.
I'd love to see some sort of a water feature in this project, and I would just say that nowhere in the city of Tacoma Park is there any moving water that isn't put there like in a natural stream that runs through. And I just think it doesn't have to be big. It could be just a little thing. I'm not talking about Trevi Fountain like in Rome, but something. I think that'd be something I'd like you to toss into the hopper and stir it around and see if it adds to the ambiance and peacefulness of the area. I'm concerned about what the mayor was talking about and her question with regard to the elevator. Because you've got that one elevator in this scheme, and if anybody wants to use the co-op and they can't fit into the parking lot down at Sycamore, and they have a car, and some do, obviously, then they're going to have to go down underneath, and that's how they're going to have to get to their groceries. Now, I've seen, like in the Safeway up on Georgia Avenue, there's an elevator system. But God help the customers if that elevator's out of order. And I would be thinking that it would be nice if you had a duplicate elevator over in that front corner where there would be just one level elevator so that people can come out of the co-op with their carts, get on that little elevator and drop right down and not have to worry about pushing their carts all the way down the length of that corridor. And it's a safety thing as well. It gives people secondary access to who need it. Next question is, because of the slope of the land, will the parking garage on the backside that overlooks Columbia Avenue, will that be open?
It's right now the height of the slab, so right along this line.
Yeah,
right
that's what
here,
I'm talking.
Would be exposed, and by that I mean whether it's a solid wall or has openings in it. That part would be visible toward the back.
I'm just thinking that if there could be portals along there, not glassed in, but just getting air moving through it, it would probably make it a bit more of a feeling of less claustrophobic space. Some people react to that a little bit. Something to think about. Are you talking about paid parking to park in this space?
Yes.
You are talking about paid parking?
Yes.
Okay, so that's part of the pro forma.
That is.
Okay, and would that pro forma figure out a way that employees can park there? And how would that fit for them? And I mean, how would it?
I mean, that would be a negotiation with each tenant. So typically during lease negotiations, you would give away a couple spaces for staff, typically for the manager and a few key employees, and then those employees would not pay or would be included in the lease rate.
Yeah. That's just something I think we need to make note of here tonight.
Absolutely.
And we'll hear more from you as you get down to that level of thinking. And I appreciate that you haven't gone very far at all about that. It seems to me that looking at the ground floor is that you may not necessarily need to actually be going after what we have been calling an anchor tenant. In other words, a big one with lots of little guys, little shops around. I mean, the large space here is just suggested. And is that a possibility that there would not necessarily have to be a so-called anchor tenant, whatever the hell that means? I'm not really sure.
Yeah. So typically, in the world of retail, an anchor tenant would typically be a much larger tenant, like for instance a Walmart or a a Costco. If you look at the Fort Lincoln,
I understand.
development. So this is Anchor with a small A, not a big A.
Yeah. No, I understand
yeah,
that
so in theory, yes, this could be a smaller tenant space.
Okay. I mean, so in other words, we don't necessarily have to be anticipating that one of these days you're going to say, hey, we got the boom, this la-di-da kind of tenant that's going to be our main.
Well, it depends on what you mean by la-di-da.
Well, somebody that's large, that's going to take up half the space, or have a lot of fame and notoriety.
No. I mean, it certainly could be, and I mean, certainly that's what we're going for. I mean, we'd love to get a great restaurateur in here, a chef-driven concept. Similar to what the Oyster Restaurant, the Blacks Group has done. I would consider that as again, anchor tenant with a small A.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about anchor tenants, you tend to think about tenants that you're willing to give significantly reduced rent because they drive so much foot traffic to a development that you can charge more rent for the inline spaces. And those developments tend to be, 100,000 to 200,000 square feet total.
Right.
But for something like this, I mean, we're shooting for the stars. I mean,
maybe we should. Would it be better if we just drop the term anchor tenant in our conversations, because it might be a little bit confusing to all of us involved?
Well, I think certainly. I mean, that's more of a question for the city manager. I think it's in the development agreement, certainly.
It is.
So okay. I think
but yeah, the definition of it sounds, that it could be misinterpreted.
If I may, my last comment is that we know that we have some very, very small businesses that would like to be able to be located in this location. I mean, Blessed Coffee, people whose owners has been talking about it for as long as we've been talking about it.
Yeah.
And I don't see a spot in here for that. And I'm wondering if there's not, I'm hoping, let's put it that way, that there might be a way to slice up one of these spaces, one of these, maybe one of those along the corridor, or figure out a way in which a couple real small retailers. And I realize that on a per square foot basis, those might be a bit higher than the larger square foot chunks. But how those could be fitted into this thing so that we can have that kind of a business here.
Yes.
Just something I would prefer to see.
Yep, and we're very supportive of Blessed Coffee and Tababu, and I think that's the goal. I mean, this is very conceptual, and we can move these demising walls in many different directions. But I mean, I think there's certainly opportunities in this plan to have smaller tenants in.
And that's why I come back to my original remark, is that I'm excited about this because it has so many possibilities.
Yeah,
I really think so. And I like the idea of the second floor small office space, because I think there's an enormous demand for that in Tacoma Park.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thanks. Want to talk process just a little bit. We have on the agenda for October 11th a discussion by the council of this concept plan. I think the goal here would be to continue to kind of discuss. It's going to take a little bit of time to think about it. I'm sure you'll hear from your constituents and that kind of thing. And then on, let's see, when did we have it coming back? 18th. The 18th. There would be a resolution kind of expressing the sense of this council to this concept plan. And the idea of this is that there's a number of different steps that still need to move along, like the traffic studies and those kinds of things. And so having some sense that the development is going in the right direction is important, to spend the money to do those studies and to make sure that, it seems to make sense to the council to be pursuing this into a more defined site plan and preliminary plan basis. So I just kind of wanted to let you know that that's the idea, and knowing as we go through this that either a comment from one of the agencies or something that comes out from the traffic study may change some of this. So there's an iterative process that's still to come. But it's very helpful, and I just wanted to kind of give people the sense that it's useful to take away your sense, the sense of this council to this plan, to give some direction to NDC, and know that it's continuing to move forward even as more information is attained and the plans are refined. So I just kind of wanted to put that into perspective about what we're looking at going forward. Obviously, there's plenty of opportunities for the council to hear comments from your constituents, even to this point, and before we get really into the formal hearings for site plan and that kind of thing. That was all.
Great. Do you guys have anything else for us?
Just want to say thank you.
All right, Councilmember Mail has a question, sorry.
Yeah, and I have a question that's based on what the city manager just said, which is we can obviously come back here as a council and talk about anything that you've just put in front of us. And we could, we could talk for an hour about the waterfall idea, right, or the water feature idea. But what we probably need to know is, from your perspective, in terms of moving forward on the traffic studies and other major parts of their project, which pieces of the conversation that are in flux are most important or most determinative to what you do next. So, we talked a lot about location of the elevators, the bay, the third floor configuration. Some of those issues seem like some of the more important pieces that having a sense from this council is critical to. But if there are other things that I didn't just list, or that you want to flag for us, either now or in follow-up, that's probably important, just to make sure that you help focus our conversations and that we get through the pieces of the issue that may be most important.
Okay. I think we'd love to continue to think about that. It's a good point, and we would love the focus of sort of the triage. What's the most important thing to think about today and moving forward. And I think some of the things you mentioned about the parking and how that third floor might be received are definitely big things, but still remain flexible. So we'd love to put together a list of those critical issues, if you will.
But when you say still flexible, can I just ask a clarifying question? So if, and this is a huge if, right? So over the next couple of weeks, if this council said, well, this looks pretty good, and we're getting good feedback from members of the public, and we said, okay, we give our okay blessing on this concept, and so you go off and you do more of the traffic studies and other things. When you mean it's still flexible, if then in January we come back and we're like, you know what, that third floor really got to go. Is that still on the table in January? Or if you don't need to answer that question now, right? I think that's what Councilmember Mail is asking for. Is like
that clarifies as well. And we'd all love to say we stay as flexible as possible, but the door closes on some of that flexibility.
And I think we need to we need to know probably before the 11th, if possible, or what are some of those things that are the door as we moving forward, like you need feedback on.
Okay. Yeah, we can put together a list.
We'll be happy to tell you what to focus on.
Yes. We like being told what to focus on.
We'll be happy to submit a letter that suggests which things you might want to.
And of course, the other thing that is coming up is that we will be having a change of council.
Right.
And so, I really appreciate getting this information. We'll be sharing it back and forth. I know a number of the candidates are watching this or will be paying attention as well. But we would want to have that feedback back and forth even with the new council. So that information that you provide would be really helpful for that.
And Madam City Manager, this will be up on the website tomorrow now? Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you very much.